Chapter 13:26. The system's serious voice rang in his head. It was a familiar voice, but in Bu Fang's head, it seemed to be very far away. Finally, I've advanced again. Bu Fang sighed inwardly. With a thought, he sank into his body and began to look at the system panel. Host: Bu Fang True Energy Cultivation Base. 9 Revolution Little Saint Cooking Talent. 9 Stars Skills. Level 2 Meteor Knife Technique, 100 out of 100. Level 2 Big Dipper Carving Technique, 100 out of 100. Level 1 Knife Technique. Overlord 13 Blades, 13 out of 13. Gourmet Array, 5 out of 6. Cutting Immortal Style, 3 out of 3 items. Golden Dragon Bone Kitchen Knife, God of Cooking Set. Black Turtle Constellation Wok, God of Cooking Set. Vermilion Chef Robe, God of Cooking Set. White Tiger Heaven Stove, God of Cooking Set. God of Cooking Overall Rating. Supreme Grade Chilean Chef, able to integrate the will of the Great Path into the ingredient. The food cooked will have a magical effect and cause a sensation. System Level. Level 4, helps the host embark on the road to becoming the God of Cooking. System Reward. 1 fragment of the God of Cooking Set, 3/5, 1 dish, the cooking method of the Fortune Flatbread of Mixed Elements, and the Gourmet Array Time. Bu Fang rubbed his chin. Bu Fang looked at the system panel, deep in thought. Many things on the panel had changed, and there were many new things. The first thing that Bu Fang noticed was the fragment of the God of Cooking Set. This time, he had obtained another fragment of the God of Cooking Set. This was a pleasant surprise. Moreover, he was right. This time, he only needed 5 pieces to successfully collect the God of Cooking Set, and up until now, he had already collected 3 pieces. Once he finished collecting 5 fragments, he could summon the last fragment of the God of Cooking Set. To be honest, Bu Fang was a little excited. Of course, in addition to the pleasant surprise of the God of Cooking Set, Bu Fang also noticed other rewards. It was rare that the system actually provided a dish as a reward for this task. According to common sense, the dish as a reward for this kind of advancement should be extraordinary. Therefore, he was very much looking forward to the Fortune Flatbread the system had mentioned. After reading the recipe for the Fortune Flatbread, Bu Fang gasped. Not only that, but the effects of the Fortune Flatbread also shocked Bu Fang. The third reward was the long-awaited Gourmet Array. There were a total of 6 portions of the Gourmet Array. So far, Bu Fang had collected 5 portions. The 5th one represented time. What was the use of this Gourmet Array? Bu Fang furrowed his brows. Perhaps it was another useless Gourmet Array. It was just like the defense array of the Gourmet Array. Because he was wearing the vermilion robe, Bu Fang did not spend too much time studying the defensive formation. No matter how strong the defense was, could it be stronger than the invincibility of the vermilion robe? In short, this advancement was within reason. Of course, the reward for advancing made Bu Fang quite happy. What made him the happiest was the breakthrough of his strength. Every advancement was a breakthrough across stages. Today, Bu Fang had broken through from the 2nd stage Little Saint to the 9th stage Little Saint. His speed of breaking through was comparable to that of you, who had eaten the 3-cup divine chicken. Bu Fang sat in a chair, his eyes slightly thoughtful. He held a wine glass in his hand, which was still swirling with wine. He crossed his legs with a satisfied look on his face. You and Little, who were playing on the side. Suddenly, both of them seemed to have sensed something, and they turned their heads to look at Bu Fang. Little, whose 3 tails were wagging, and his big eyes were blinking. The look in Yu's eyes became more and more strange. Boom! There was a muffled sound. Waves of true energy seemed to spread from Bu Fang's body. The ripples spread in the void, as if the void could not bear the burden. He broke through? Yu asked in surprise. Boom! Boom! As the ripples spread, there seemed to be the sound of something exploding. Compared to Yu's breakthrough, Bu Fang's was more direct. In one breath, he directly soared into the sky. From the 2nd stage Little Saint, He reached the 9th stage, little saint, in a flash. This time, if Hades' era saw it, he would probably be scared out of his wits. Perhaps he would be a little confused. Were breakthroughs so cheap nowadays? The breakthrough did not last long. After a long time, Bufang opened his eyes. His eyes were very calm, as if breaking through was as common as eating and drinking. He glanced at Yu and little Hu were in a daze in the distance. Bufang grabbed the wine glass, stood up, and went into the kitchen. After a moment of confusion, Nethery and Foxy began to play with each other again. This was enough to shock the outside world, but in the store, it became a normal thing. Bufang placed the glass in the kitchen. Bufang's mind flickered. He entered the heaven and earth farmland. As soon as he entered the farmland, Nyo Hansan sensed the existence of Bufang's aura, so he flew over. In a short while, he arrived in front of Bufang. Sizing up Bufang, Nyo Hansan stared at Bufang, which made the latter's hair stand on end. "What's wrong?" Bufang looked at Nyo Hansan, puzzled. "Owner Bu. This old bull thought I would never see you again." Then, Nyo Hansan shouted, spreading his arms and flying toward Bufang. However, Bufang naturally wouldn't let him succeed. He raised his hand, placing a finger on Nyo Hansen's forehead, preventing the latter from moving forward or retreating. "Alright, I came to the heaven and earth farmland today to see the situation inside. Also, I want you to prepare some spirit rice for me," Bufang said. Nyo Hansan had already regained his composure. He widened his eyes, and after saying that, he turned around to prepare the spirit rice. Bufang, on the other hand, wandered around the heaven and earth farmland. He had to admit that the heaven and earth farmland was becoming more and more real. The entire farmland was filled with the chirping of birds and the fragrance of flowers. It was filled with dense spirit energy. Taking a deep breath, the moist and sweet air went into one's nose, making one feel as if his body and mind had been cleansed. In the river, the spring of life flowed, and the little white dragon formed by the spring of life dashed around. The blood lobster waved its pincers as if it had become the tyrant of the river. On the ground, the grass swayed as 80 and the 8 treasures pig ran. The 3-eyed wild lion was lazily lying on the ground, snoring loudly. The many treasures heaven tree stood in front of the wooden house. The heaven tree swayed, emitting radiance. The heaven tree's existence made the plants and creatures in the farmland grow unceasingly. On the tree, a pure white senseless lotus bloomed quietly, like a snow lotus on an ice mountain. The senseless lotus had a strange energy that filled the entire space. This scene made Bufang's mood calm. In the distance, Nyo Hansan returned quickly. He was holding a cloth bag in his hand, and the bag was filled with spirit rice. Receiving the cloth bag from Nyo Hansan, Bufang reached his hand into it. The cold and moist spirit rice brushed his finger. The moist feeling made Bufang narrow his eyes. He was very satisfied. Carrying the cloth bag, Bufang said goodbye to Nyo Hansan and left the farmland. Nyo Hansan stood in front of the wooden house, clasping his hands. Looking at Bufang's back as he left, he could feel the earth-shaking change in Bufang's body. When the farmland was shaken, Nyo Hansan thought that Bufang was in trouble. It seemed that Bufang had blocked the calamity, and now, he seemed to have been reborn. This kind of harvest after blocking the calamity was absolutely huge. Back in the kitchen, Bufang poured out the spirit rice. Of course, this spirit rice wasn't ordinary. It contained the farmland's will of the Great Path. And Bufang needed this spirit rice to make the reward he had just received, the mixed essence fortune flatbread, or fortune flatbread for short. The name sounded very fresh and refined. Of course, more than that, Bufang was surprised by the fortune flatbread's ability. The fortune flatbread, one creation. The flatbread baked with the extremely difficult 9-fire dragon charge fire control technique contains the creation of heaven and earth. After being eaten, the creation can be used on the diner. The so-called good fortune varies according to the diner's own luck. Those with strong luck can obtain top-notch good fortune, while those with weak luck can obtain ordinary good fortune after eating it. The system's prompt rang in Bufang's mind. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. The so-called creation was naturally not ordinary. For example, if you ate the 3-cup divine chicken, you could directly break through from the 2nd revolution Little Saint to the 9th revolution Little Saint. This could be considered a heaven-defying creation. Although the top creation couldn't compare to this, it wasn't weak either. At the very least, good fortune was beneficial to people. The fortune flatbread can be taken away. You can buy 3 at a time, Bufang pondered. He suddenly felt that another hot dish was about to be born. Of course, before that, Bufang had to make the fortune flatbread. At the thought of this, Bufang rolled up his sleeves excitedly, ready to make the mixed essence fortune flatbread. Earth Prison, Black Temple, Rumble. The fall of Black Demon, the master of the Forbidden Land, made the Black Temple ownerless. After Black Demon's death, the Black Temple, which was shrouded in a terrible energy, began to change dramatically. Streams of energy, which could not be seen clearly before, suddenly emerged. In the void, it was suddenly torn apart. Several figures emerged in the sky. Lord Go, Hades' Era, and Prison Overlord Yinglong were all hovering in the void. They looked at the flickering Black Temple in silence. With Black Demon's death, the Forbidden Land is ownerless and about to turn into the dust of history. The power of the law that seals the Forbidden Land will begin to dissipate, and the treasures of the Black Temple from 2 eras will be exposed. Hades' Era said excitedly. With Black Demon's death, the treasures in the Black Temple became delicious steamed buns. Rumble. In the Black Temple, as the energy collapsed, one expert after another from the Black Temple dashed out of it. Everyone's face was filled with horror. They wanted to escape, but they had the mark of the Forbidden Land on them. Once they stepped out, they would be turned to ashes by the Black Lightning. This was the destruction of the power of the law. It meant that the Black Temple, which had existed for 2 eras, had truly disappeared. In the face of the Black Lightning that contained the power of the law, even Lord Go didn't dare to touch it easily. It was the power of the forbidden. Rumble. In the distant sky, a golden skeleton was watching from afar, the blood-colored flame burning in its eye sockets. The fate of the Black Temple made Jean Lu completely silent. He raised his head and glanced at the sky. There, Lord Go, Hades' Era, and the others all turned to look at Jean Lu. Jean Lu didn't say anything, but his eyes seemed to be filled with endless sadness. Perhaps this was the tragic end of these living beings who had lingered on with their last breaths into this era. Jean Lu was gone. The power of the law that enveloped the Black Temple finally disappeared. The terrible power of the law that had imprisoned the Black Temple for an era finally dissipated. From now on, the Black Temple would no longer exist in Earth Prison. After the power of the law disappeared, Lord Go, Hades' Era, and the others flew into it. All the creatures in the Black Temple had died under the power of the law, but the treasures inside were not destroyed. These things were all treasures. The fact that they could survive from the last era to this one naturally showed that they were precious. It just so happened that Nether Prison was invading. With the Black Temple's treasures, the strength of Earth Prison's army would be greatly improved. For a moment, 2 men and 1 dog took away almost everything in the Black Temple. In the depths of the sky, a graceful figure stood in the sky, wearing a long white robe and looking peerless. Ice Saint glanced at the Black Temple, which had lost its power of the law, and sighed softly. The next moment, she took a step forward and returned to the god-vanishing mountain that belonged to her. Acheron's little store, Bufang had ground all the spirit rice into powder and was calmly rubbing his hands. He was preparing to make the fortune flatbread that he had been looking forward to. Chapter 13:27. Swish. Grains of wheat, which looked like pearls, slid down from Bufang's hand. Looking at the lovely, bouncing wheat, Bufang couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. He pinched a grain of wheat with his thumb and forefinger, then lifted it up. Under the light, the wheat seemed to be transparent like a gem. This wheat, which contained the will of the Great Path, was indeed extraordinary. His mind flickered. Bufang, on the other hand, took out a stone mill and ground the wheat that was shaken off from the spirit rice into flour. The fine flour was white, pure white. Bufang took out the processed flour. Then, he took out a blue and white porcelain pot. He poured the flour into the pot and the spring of life, which contained rich energy essence, into it. The fortune flatbread of primeval chaos was not a dish in the god of cooking's menu, so the ingredients used were all the top ingredients that Bufang could use so far. Swish, he poured water into the flour, added yeast, and began to knead it. In a short while, it had become a huge ball of flour. Bufang's movements were very rhythmic, and he used every bit of his strength just right. Kneading dough was actually a technical job, and he needed to master the appropriate technique. Buzz, as Bufang kneaded it, the dough in the porcelain pot began to spin, becoming more and more translucent, as if there was light flowing over it. As soon as his palm touched the dough, a burst of elasticity bounced off Bufang's palm. Bufang took out a bowl of oil, poured the translucent oil into the porcelain pot, and continued to knead the dough. This time, his kneading movements were different. Because of the addition of oil, the dough was very creamy. As he kneaded, all the oil was mixed into the dough. The dough, which was as fair as a baby's skin, suddenly turned muddy yellow. This was because it had absorbed the oil. Adding oil and kneading it into the dough was also to enhance the taste of the fortune flatbread. The oil he chose was also meticulously brewed vegetable oil, not animal oil. He kneaded the oil into the dough. He placed the blue and white porcelain pot aside and waited for the dough to ferment. It took a long time. Bufang did not stand in front of the kitchen and wait. Instead, she wiped her palms. He took a layer of gauze and covered the dough with it. Then, he walked out of the kitchen with a teapot in his hand. He walked into the restaurant. He pulled over a chair and curled up on it. He sat at the door and looked outside. The clouds were drifting slowly, and he felt quite content. After leisurely drinking tea for a while, Bufang returned to the kitchen. He lit the fire and opened the pot. He placed the black turtle constellation wok on the stove and poured the golden oil into the wok. When the oil boiled, he poured the flour into it. He began to stir-fry the flour. After the flour turned into a pastry, he took it out and poured it into a bowl. After fermentation and awakening, the dough swelled a little, and the qi contained in it was circulating. He took out the dough, kneaded it into a pancake, spread the pastry on it, and sprinkled the sparkling white sugar on it. He rolled up the huge flatbread and cut it into 4 pieces. Each piece was flattened from the cut point. Soon, it was pressed into 4 flatbread pieces. He took out a kind of spirit fruit, cut it in half, and placed it on the flatbread. Then, he sprinkled some sesame seeds on it. The initial stage of the flatbread was completed. Next was the most important process of the fortune flatbread, baking. It was not easy to bake a fortune flatbread. This flatbread was called the fortune flatbread of primordial chaos. The name was quite long, but there was an important point. What was the fortune flatbread of primordial chaos? It was worth studying, and it had a lot to do with the baking method. His mind flickered. A huge shadow emerged. With a boom, the shadow was smashed to the ground. It was a huge oven. This oven was not ordinary. It was made of mud, and its surface was uneven. It was even a little black. It gave off a rustic air. It was more than 2 meters high and 1 meter in diameter, and it was wrapped in a layer of yellow mud. It was called the charcoal oven. After preparing the oven, Bufang entered the heaven and earth farmland. He swayed around the myriad treasures heaven tree and broke a few slender branches of the heaven tree. This made the myriad treasures heaven tree shake its branches as if it wanted to fight with Bufang. After taking the branches, Bufang ran away as fast as he could. He returned to the kitchen. He placed the branches in the middle of the charcoal oven, opened his mouth, and spat out a mass of white flame. The flame flew out and fell into the charcoal oven, igniting the branches of the heaven tree. After doing all this, Bufang retreated to the side. The fortune flatbread needed top-grade materials to make. Even the branches used to warm the fire were the branches of the heaven tree, which were absolutely high-end. Squeak! The flames burned in the oven, and the rolling flames seemed to be boiling. As the branches of the immortal tree burned, wisps of smoke filled the air. Moreover, the scorching heat attached to the walls of the oven, distorting the air and temperature inside. There was a reason why the charcoal oven was used. The flatbread baked with this thing was the real flatbread. After a long time, the branches of the heaven tree were finally burned out. After all, it was just a small branch that Bufang had taken from the heaven tree, so it wasn't much. Bufang stepped on the air and soared into the sky. He held the finished flatbread in his hand. He came to the mouth of the charcoal oven. He raised his head and looked at the mouth of the oven. Inside, the ashes of the heaven tree branches were still emitting a high temperature. This high temperature was what Bufang needed. Holding the flatbread in one hand, Bufang's eyes narrowed. Holding the flatbread, he reached his hand into the charcoal oven. As soon as the flatbread entered the oven, the scorching heat seemed to melt Bufang's arm. Even though Bufang had reached the 9-revolution Little Saint cultivation base, he was still quite shocked by this temperature. After all, it was left by the burning branches of the heaven tree. However, this was what Bufang needed. Clatter! Bufang slapped the flatbread in his hand on the wall of the oven. Sizzle! Sizzle! In an instant, the flatbread made a sizzling sound. Under the scorching heat, it began to change. Bufang repeated the same action and slapped the rest of the biscuits onto the furnace wall. Before long, the furnace wall was covered with 18 biscuits. 18 flatbread in one furnace was not bad. Bufang reached out his hand. His arm had already turned red. It was burned by the scorching heat in the oven. To be honest, the making of the fortune flatbread was really a technical job. He sat cross-legged on the ground. His mental force immediately surged, spreading toward the oven. In just a short while, strand after strand of it spread into the furnace, covering the entire furnace. He began to carefully observe the changes of the flatbread in the oven. Time flew. Almost 6 hours had passed. The flatbread was finished. Bufang, who was sitting cross-legged, opened his eyes and retracted his mental force. Buzz! Instantly, a dazzling light burst out from the mouth of the oven. It soared into the sky, turning into a beam of light. Rumble! In the sky of Earth Prison, rolling thunder clouds emerged. Xiao Bai's eyes flashed, and he walked straight out of the kitchen. Resisting the lightning punishment had always been his job, and Xiao Bai enjoyed it very much. Bufang's eyes shone brightly. Slowly, he stood up. Outside the restaurant, thunder and lightning surged, and the terrible lightning punishment kept rumbling. This attracted the attention of many experts in the vicinity. With the appearance of the lightning punishment, they knew that the owner of Acheron's little restaurant was cooking delicious food again. Acheron Valley Great Sage Acheron, who was holding a jade jar with one hand, sat cross-legged, humming a tune. He was in a good mood. All of a sudden, he narrowed his eyes, looking at the location of Acheron's little restaurant. His eyes sparkled. This scene. Bufang, my little friend, is cooking delicious food again? Great Sage Acheron's eyes lit up. Only Bufang's new dish could make him so excited. Getting up from the recliner, Great Sage Acheron tidied up his clothes. Holding the jade jar, he walked in the air, heading toward Bufang's restaurant. In front of the restaurant, a few people stood in front of the door. Since Nether Prison was going to attack Earth Prison, many experts had left Acheron City to join the army. They were all from Earth Prison, so they naturally had to fight for Earth Prison's dignity. Therefore, there were not many people in Acheron City today. However, the scene of the dish transcending the tribulation still attracted many curious onlookers. Sizzle. After Xiao Bai had transcended the tribulation, there seemed to be lightning arcs jumping over his body, and a terrible aura was spreading. As Bufang broke through to the level of the 9 revolution little saint, Xiao Bai's aura became more and more oppressive. It was not clear how strong Xiao Bai's fighting prowess was now. In the restaurant, Yu and Little, who had already craned their necks in anticipation. The man and the fox moved very synchronously. A fragrance filled the air. It was the fragrance of flatbread. The extreme aroma of the biscuit made their eyes light up. In the kitchen, Bufang stood in front of a huge oven. He reached into the oven, took out the fortune flatbreads, and placed them on a plate. Clack, clack. The fortune flatbread that was taken out of the oven looked very tempting. The surface of the biscuit was golden in color, and the juice of the spirit fruit embedded in it flowed around, making the biscuit even more attractive. The back of the flatbread was not as smooth and round, but it did not affect its taste. Every piece of flatbread was emitting steaming hot steam. It was as if one could not hold it with one hand. After placing the 3 flatbread on a blue and white porcelain plate, Bufang walked out of the kitchen with them. Ting-a-ling! The curtain was lifted. Many expectant gazes were directed at him. Bufang's face was calm. He carried the plate to the table. He placed the plate on it. Yu and Little, who immediately looked at the fortune flatbread on the plate. Outside the door, a burst of laughter rang out. The great sage of Acheron flew in with a jade jar in one hand. After a while, he landed in the restaurant. Bufang, my little friend, I can smell the rich fragrance from afar. What delicious food are you cooking this time? The great sage of Acheron twitched his nose, looking quite intoxicated. Bufang glanced at the great sage of Acheron and couldn't help but twitch his mouth. Does this guy have a dog's nose? I can smell it. However, he didn't say anything. He just raised his hand and pointed at the fortune flatbread on the table. Although the fortune flatbread looked tempting, it did not look very attractive. Compared with those delicious dishes that were overflowing with fragrance and brilliant colors, it was rather dry. But it was just a flatbread after all. This flatbread is called the fortune flatbread of primordial energy, Bufang said. After that, he raised his hand and grabbed a flatbread. Bufang was very curious about the effect of the fortune flatbread. Under the curious gazes of Yu and Little, who Bufang threw the flatbread to Yu. He gave one to the great sage of Acheron and grabbed the last one himself. What's so good about a dry flatbread? It's better to make barbecue meat. The taste of meat is much better than a dry flatbread. The great sage of Acheron looked at the hot flatbread in his hand and twitched his mouth, looking a little unhappy. Oh? You don't want to eat it? Then give it back to me. Bufang glanced at the great sage of Acheron and said. The great sage of Acheron smiled awkwardly. Eat, eat, eat. My little friend Bufang, who can brew the supreme-grade Acheron helplessness wine, will definitely make an extraordinary flatbread. Today, I will sacrifice myself to be a gentleman. The great sage of Acheron smiled. Then, he grabbed the fortune flatbread, opened his mouth, and took a bite. A crisp, crunching sound rang out. However, he didn't bite the flatbread off. Under the crispy skin, there was a tender texture. More importantly, the great sage of Acheron's eyes went wide when he sensed the fortune flatbread in his mouth. Chapter 1328. The Fortune Flatbread of Primordial Chaos. Just from the name, one could tell that it was extraordinary. Originally, the great sage Acheron didn't care about this flatbread at all. In his opinion, how delicious could a flatbread be? How could a cake made of flour compare to the delicacies of the land and sea? What had he, the great sage Acheron, not eaten before? How could he yield to a mere flatbread? Then, the great sage Acheron took a bite of the flatbread and chose to yield. Crunch. The crispy flatbread surface was instantly bitten. After the golden flatbread surface was bitten, the soft and tender meat inside was exposed. It was incomparably tender and fragrant. As he continued to bite, there seemed to be a majestic aura that was about to gush out of the flatbread. That feeling made the great sage Acheron's eyes widen in disbelief. That was because, with the great sage's cultivation base, he could naturally sense the aura that was about to gush out of the flatbread. It was the aura materialized by the will of the great path. What was going on? The illusory will of the great path could materialize into a gas? Crunch, crunch. He took a bite of the flatbread. The meat was sweet, and his mouth was filled with a unique taste. It was the taste of charcoal, pure and authentic. This feeling was unexpectedly blissful. The aura formed by the will of the great path flowed through his mouth, making a cool, sizzling sound as it entered his body. Was the so-called good fortune the aura materialized by the will of the great path? Primordial chaos? Was that what it was talking about? The flatbread had a wisp of primordial chaos energy, and it dared to make the great sage laugh at the heavens? The great sage Acheron's eyes focused again, and a bright light shot out from his eyes. It was different. It was completely different. As the flatbread entered his stomach, the wisp of aura entered the great sage Acheron's body, but he couldn't sense it anymore. His divine will couldn't sense the aura of the will of the great path. What was going on? The great sage Acheron suddenly shuddered. He felt even more incredulous. Was this flatbread so magical? Suddenly, great sage Acheron's eyes widened. At that moment, he looked at his muscular, bulging arms. He discovered that there seemed to be an infinite power bursting out of his arm. The speed of the bursting made the great sage Acheron shudder. This flatbread? Could it be that it can increase one's physical strength? Great sage Acheron said in shock. The muscles on his body bulged, and his chest muscles were huge. His clothes were tight, and he had a fit figure. He was the great sage. How could he strengthen the great sage? How terrifying would that be? For the great sage, the more powerful his physical body became in battle, the more he would be able to crush his opponent. Increase my physical strength? Bufang glanced at the great sage Acheron, his eyes full of sympathy. It seems that your luck is really bad, Bufang said lightly. Then, while the great sage Acheron was stunned, Bufang grabbed the fortune flatbread of primordial chaos and took a bite. A crunching sound rang out. The fragrant flatbread was chewed by Bufang in his mouth. The crispy exterior and moist, tender biscuit meat indeed gave people a special experience. It was intoxicating. Great sage Acheron bit the flatbread and stared at Bufang. Apart from the enchanting effect of the flatbread, the taste alone was very attractive. However, the great sage Acheron still didn't understand what Bufang meant by bad luck. How could eating flatbread have anything to do with luck? The difficulty of making the fortune flatbread was not high, but it was not easy either. The main reason was that the charcoal oven was more difficult to operate, and there were many tricks involved. The baking of the charcoal oven squeezed out the will of the great path in the flour, turning it into a wisp of energy that kept flowing. This energy was the essence of the fortune flatbread, just like a human's soul. The primordial chaos energy was the soul of the flatbread. This chi was the so-called good fortune. Bufang took a bite of the flatbread. Soon, Bufang's eyes focused. Bufang opened his eyes, and the energy kept flowing in his body. Bufang's mental force began to soar, becoming stronger and stronger. He released his divine will. Originally, the maximum range that his divine will could cover was 100 miles. But at this moment, the range that Bufang's divine will could cover was getting bigger and bigger. It had reached 1,000 miles. Great sage Acheron sucked in a cold breath. How was that possible? The breakthrough of mental force was more difficult than the breakthrough of cultivation base. Bufang had just eaten a flatbread, and the range of his mental force had already reached such a level? Then what was the point of cultivating? Everyone should just go and eat the flatbread. Well, my luck seems to be better than yours. Bufang glanced at great sage Acheron, the corners of his mouth twitching. Great sage Acheron was dumbfounded. What did this guy mean? Why was eating a flatbread related to luck? What was this guy trying to say? Crack. You held the flatbread, parted her red lips, and took a bite. The surface of the flatbread broke, and the fragrant and tender taste poured into her body. Yu's eyes lit up. The energy of the will of the great path entered her body. Then, under great sage Acheron's dumbfounded gaze, Yu's aura skyrocketed from the 9 revolution little saint. She directly broke through to the 1st revolution great sage, the 2nd revolution great sage, and the 3rd revolution great sage. In the end, her cultivation stagnated. Great sage Acheron was dumbfounded. He was so shocked that he almost dropped the precious jade jar in his hand. What was going on? Who could tell him what was going on? She had just eaten a bite of the flatbread, and this woman had broken through from the 9 revolution little saint to the 3rd revolution great sage? Were the great sage so cheap now? She could break through just by eating a flatbread? I worked hard and cultivated for 10,000 years to become a great sage. This woman, great sage Acheron's mouth was trembling. As a great sage, he understood how difficult it was to become a great sage. Moreover, after reaching the great sage's level, it would be even more difficult to break through to the next revolution. However, when he sensed Yu's rapid breakthrough, he felt extremely helpless. Great sage Acheron felt a deep sense of helplessness. It was scary to compare oneself to others. He finally understood what Bufang was talking about when he talked about luck. He had eaten a flatbread, but his skin was a little harder. Bufang was in a better condition than him, as his mental energy had increased several times. As for that woman, she was even more monstrous. She directly rushed to the 3rd revolution great sage. Compared to that woman, his luck was indeed crap. Bufang retracted his divine will, leisurely eating the flatbread. The group of people outside, who had been watching them, were already dumbfounded. After the supreme grade Acheron's helplessness wine, did Owner Bu cook another peerless dish? It could make one break through to the great sage's realm in a flash? This flatbread was going to be popular. This was the same thought in everyone's mind. Well, fortune flatbread of mixed element, 50,000 nether crystals per flatbread, and each person can buy 3 flatbreads a day. Bufang took a bite of the flatbread and glanced at great sage Acheron, whose lips were trembling. The price that Bufang shouted stunned everyone. 50,000 nether crystals per flatbread? This flatbread, which had the same effect as the supreme grade Acheron's helplessness, why was it so cheap? A cup of that wine cost 1 million nether crystals, so this flatbread should at least cost 1 million nether crystals, right? Otherwise, how could it be called this effective? In fact, only Bufang knew the reason. Although the fortune flatbread's effect was heaven-defying, and it contained the will of the great path, which could enhance the user's strength in various ways, this enhancement was based on luck. If one's luck was good, the enhancement would be quite heaven-defying. Take you, for example. This was a great fortune. If one's luck was bad, the enhancement would be very ordinary, such as strengthening one's body or something. Take great sage Acheron, for example. This kind of enhancement was like a joke made by God. As for Bufang's mental force enhancement, it was actually not bad. The enhancement of his divine will from 100 miles to 1,000 miles was equivalent to stepping into a mature state from an immature divine will. If he cultivated slowly, it would take a long time. However, when Bufang sensed this state, it would be much easier for him to cultivate to 1,000 miles divine will in the future. Even so, the fortune flatbread shouldn't be so cheap, right? In fact, the reason was, the fortune of the flatbread didn't last long, and everything was caused by the mixed element. When the mixed element was used up, the fortune would disappear. This lasted for about an hour. When Bufang explained the reason, everyone was stunned. Everyone was enlightened. Great sage Acheron narrowed his eyes and nodded. He knew that if his 10,000 years of cultivation couldn't compare to a little girl taking a bite of a flatbread, he should go and hit his head against a wall. However, when he glanced at the flatbread in his hand, he didn't believe it. The enhancement of my physical strength is indeed due to bad luck. But I don't believe that my luck will always be so bad. So, Owner Boo, give me another flatbread. Great Sage Acheron's nostrils seemed to be about to snort. Bufang glanced at Great Sage Acheron and didn't say anything. Then, he went into the kitchen and took out a basket of flatbread. The fortune flatbread is now on sale. Each flatbread costs 50,000 nether crystals, and each person is limited to 3 flatbreads a day. Let me tell you something. With a fortune flatbread, you'll have more means on the battlefield, and you'll have more chances of survival. If any of you has heaven-defying luck and breaks through to the 9 Revolution Great Sage by eating a flatbread, you'll be the most awesome person in the world, respected by all, and dominate the battlefield. Bufang said. His words were sonorous and forceful as if they were true. In fact, although the fortune flatbread could give people fortune, it was impossible to break through to the 9 Revolution Great Sage unless one was a great sage. Moreover, only a great sage with heaven-defying luck eating a flatbread could achieve such an effect. An ordinary little saint who could reach the level of you was already on the verge of going to heaven. As soon as Bufang's words rang out, everyone outside the restaurant went crazy. That was right. Owner Boo was right. The fortune flatbread could really be their life-saving means. When they were in a desperate situation, a flatbread was their hope. If they took a bite of it, if their luck burst out, they would become a 9 Revolution Great Sage and turn the tide on the battlefield. Then, they would become the heroes of the whole Earth prison. Owner Boo, don't say anything. Give me 3 first. An expert shouted impatiently. 150,000 nether crystals for a chance to bring glory to their ancestors. It was AF** King bargain. Since they could cultivate to such a level, they were all obsessed with their luck. Just like the great sage Acheron. He was very confident in his luck. So, after eating the first flatbread in a hurry, when half an hour was up and the ability was gone, he eagerly took a bite of the second one. Another stream of energy flowed out of the flatbread and poured into his body. Then, the great sage Acheron felt as if his body was about to explode. He opened his mouth and spat out a scorching fireball. As soon as the fireball flew out, Xiao Bai slapped it away and made it disappear. Congratulations! You've unlocked the luck of fate once again. You've gained the ability to spit fireballs. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched as he looked at the great sage Acheron and said seriously, "How bad is the luck of the great sage Acheron to be able to unlock such a low-end ability? Did he offend the goddess of luck?" The great sage Acheron's face darkened. The ability to spit fireballs? When he thought about eating a flatbread on the battlefield and getting the ability to spit fireballs, the great sage Acheron felt like a child abandoned by the heaven. Well, the fortune of the fortune flatbread is not ordinary. To a large extent, it can give you a permanent ability, but it's rare. Bufang stroked his chin as he recalled the words the system had said in a serious tone. He couldn't help but tell the others about it. The aura of the great sage had faded from Yu's body, and she had returned to the level of the little saint of the 9 Revolution. She didn't feel any discomfort. There was no doubt that the fortune flatbread would not bring any side effect. Yu had not finished the flatbread in her hand, so she gave a little of it to little Hu. Sticking out his tongue, he ate the flatbread and narrowed his eyes in happiness. The 3 tails were shaking continuously. "Bufang boy, give me another flatbread. I don't believe that my luck is so bad," the great sage Acheron said, unconvinced. "Obtaining the ability to spit fireballs is simply a joke. Am I, the great sage, here to make a show?" After spitting several fireballs in a row, the great sage Acheron's eyes turned red. He bought a flatbread from Bufang and grabbed it in his hand. Then, the great sage Acheron finished the second flatbread angrily. The experts outside the door had already gone crazy. They lined up again to buy the fortune flatbread. An hour later, the great sage Acheron's eyes suddenly lit up. They were as sharp as the brightest star in the night. He picked up the flatbread, grinned excitedly, and spat out a fireball. Looking at the fireball, the great sage Acheron was stunned. Bufang was also shocked, sucking in a breath of cold air. Chapter 13:29. The most frightening thing was that the air suddenly became quiet. The great sage Acheron was stunned. His eyes widened as he looked at Bufang. The look of disbelief in his eyes was like a bolt of lightning that pierced through the sky. Bufang was also stunned. He slightly opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything. The great sage Acheron raised the biscuit in his hand and looked at it. The biscuit was perfectly round, and its golden surface was inlaid with 2 slices of a spirit fruit. But he hadn't eaten it yet. The great sage Acheron had a bad feeling in his heart. He opened his mouth, and a mass of hot air involuntarily rose from his chest. Then, it gathered in his mouth and finally spurted out. In the air, it turned into a scarlet fireball. The fireball exploded like a gorgeous firework. It was too beautiful to behold. Perfect technique, however, it was useless. Why hasn't your ability disappeared yet? Bufang was a little surprised. Looking at the great sage Acheron, he asked doubtfully. An hour has passed. Under normal circumstances, your ability should have disappeared. Is it because your ability is too weak, so it prolonged its disappearance? Bufang said after thinking for a moment. The great sage Acheron's face was as dark as the bottom of a pot. Bufang's words gave him a little hope. If it was really like what Bufang had said, then it was not bad. Otherwise, he, the great sage Acheron, the great sage 9 revolution, would spit out a fireball when he was fighting against someone. That scene would be extremely awkward. It would be like a street juggler grabbing a wooden stick and spitting it out. Instantly, the fireball on the wooden stick would explode. He was the supreme great sage Acheron of Earth Prison, not a street juggler. Another hour passed by. The great sage Acheron sat on the chair, his face dark. Bufang, on the other hand, was selling pancakes with great enthusiasm. Many people spent nether crystals to buy flatbreads, and they were very happy. Although 150,000 underworld crystals was a lot, those who could afford to buy flatbread were basically Little Saint-level experts. Therefore, it was not difficult for them to fork out 150,000 underworld crystals. Some of the Little Saint even ate the flatbread extravagantly to feel the effects of the flatbread. Boom! As the Little Saint, who wanted to test the efficacy of the flatbread, ate the flatbread, a wisp of fortune energy from the flatbread flowed into his body. The Little Saint's eyes lit up. In the next moment, 2 pairs of pure white wings appeared on his back. It flapped its wings, and it instantly turned into a stream of light that sliced through the sky. His cultivation base continued to rise. Although it wasn't much, it was enough to make the Little Saint ecstatic. It seemed like his luck was pretty good. Also, the fortune flatbread could really give people fortune. If he was lucky, he might really become a great sage and turn the tables on Nether Prison as Owner Boo had said. At that time, he might really become famous all over the world. The great sage Acheron glanced at the ecstatic Little Saint and snorted. His voice boomed like thunder. It exploded in the Little Saint's ears, causing the Little Saint to be dumbfounded. "Get out of here! Don't show off in front of me again, or I'll kill you with a finger!" The great sage Acheron threatened with a dark face. The Little Saint quickly flapped the wings on his back and left the shop. Bufang looked over curiously. The great sage Acheron's nostrils flared. He glanced at Bufang, then opened his mouth. Rumble! Another gorgeous fireball shot out and exploded in the air like a gorgeous flower. The great sage Acheron almost fainted when he saw the fireball. It's over. His reputation as the great sage Acheron was ruined by a flatbread. I can't believe it's a permanent ability. You You must be the legendary chosen one, Bufang said, his eyes wide as he looked at the great sage Acheron. He was really surprised. The system had said that it was very difficult to get a permanent ability from the fortune flatbread. The chance was almost 1 in 10,000. But what happened? The great sage Acheron had gotten a permanent ability on the second flatbread. Although this ability was a little useless, but who cared? His luck was simply heaven-defying. The look of astonishment in Bufang's eyes made the great sage Acheron want to slap him to death. He was a little confused, wondering if he was lucky or unlucky. Glancing at the last flatbread in his hand, the great sage Acheron was a little hesitant. As the chosen one who had gotten a permanent ability after eating the flatbread, he should be very confident in his luck. However, after thinking for a while, the great sage Acheron gave up on eating the last flatbread. Who knew if he activated another permanent ability that could spray water? If so, he could only hide in a corner and cry silently. Bufang entered the kitchen. After a while, he came out again. Once again, he took out a basket of fortune flatbread. The diners who had bought the flatbread left the restaurant one after another, all very excited. The news about the fortune flatbread in the restaurant quickly spread throughout Earth Prison. The fortune flatbread could give the person who ate it an unimaginable fortune. As long as one was lucky enough, one could even temporarily advance from the little saint realm to the great sage realm. As long as one had confidence in himself, a flatbread could help him reach the peak of his life. There was also a 1 in 10,000 chance that he could get a permanent ability. Just like the great sage Acheron, he could get the ability to breathe fire permanently. In less than a day, the news spread throughout the whole Earth Prison. Everyone was dumbfounded the moment they heard the news. Fortune flatbread. What the hell was that? Getting a fortune by luck? Was there such a flatbread? Eating a flatbread was like drawing a lottery. Many people were skeptical at first. However, when a diner pulled out a piece of flatbread in front of the many experts, he took a bite and swallowed it with a loud crack. The little saint instantly turned into a giant more than 5 meters tall, and the energy surrounding his body was extremely strong. The strength of the 7th revolution little saint also instantly reached the 9th revolution little saint realm. Everyone was dumbfounded by what they saw. It was much better than the supreme grade Acheron helplessness wine, which could continuously improve the strength of the 2nd revolution. Of course, half an hour later, the little saint returned to his original state, but his aura did not fluctuate or collapse. This once again made everyone's blood boil. This was a kind of enhancement method without any side effect. If everyone had a flatbread, they could bite it and gain a powerful ability when facing a nether prison expert in a great battle, and they could definitely catch the enemy by surprise. As the shop owner said, if one became the great sage by eating the flatbread, wouldn't his name go down in history? In this epoch, he would leave behind a thick and colorful stroke. Everyone had a dream of becoming the great sage, and for this dream, they were happy to move forward. For that sliver of opportunity, therefore, when the news came out, the whole Earth Prison was boiling. The aristocratic families rubbed their palms and rushed to Acheron's little store. This time, the sale was even more popular than that of the supreme-grade Acheron helplessness wine. For a moment, the door of the little store was crowded with people. Bufang brought out basket after basket of fortune flatbreads from the kitchen. He was very happy to sell the flatbreads. If it weren't for the fact that each person was limited to 3 flatbreads a day, the roof of Acheron's little store would have been torn off. Those diners were really crazy. Even Jin Jiao and Yin Jiao had come to the store. Hades' era, Yinglong prison overlord, and Lord Go were nowhere to be found. Nether prison was eyeing them covetously, but it hadn't launched an attack yet. It might be waiting for an opportunity. Therefore, when the remaining prison overlords learned about Bufang's fortune flatbread, they all came to the store. If the flatbread was really that magical, it would definitely become a powerful weapon for Earth Prison to fight against Nether Prison. Of course, such a sensational news couldn't be kept from Nether Prison. The people of Nether Prison also learned about it. However, most of them snorted. Fortune flatbread? A flatbread can steal the fortune of heaven and earth? It's ridiculous. Earth Prison is trying to relieve the pressure brought to them by our army. That's why they sent out such a ridiculous message to intimidate our army. The people of Earth Prison are indeed idiots. They deserve to be trampled by Nether Prison in the near future. The auras of Nether Prison experts towered into the sky as they stood there. Nether Prison's army began to assemble. The armies that had conquered the surrounding small worlds had returned and gathered in the void. The army of the Fire Demon Clan, the Shadow Demon Clan, and the Nether Chef Clan, after conquering the surrounding small worlds, the armies of the 9 clans gathered in the center. Their terrible auras seemed to have turned into monstrous beasts that were about to break through the sky. The sound of war horns tore through the sky and was deafening. Every Nether Prison expert's blood boiled at the sound of the horns, and they roared into the sky. Warships sailed across the sky, each manned by an army and guarded by a 9-revolution little saint. As the warships sailed past, the oppressive void rumbled as if it could not bear the weight. They brought with them a heavy and oppressive aura. In the sky there was a stream of light flying past. It floated in midair in an instant. A silver sword flew across the sky, and a gray-robed old man stood on its blade with his hands clasped behind his back. He was none other than the patriarch of the Sword Demon Clan. In the void there seemed to be a huge shadow faintly discernible. It was a creature that seemed to be condensed from flames, burning the void, and terrifying heat waves swept out. He was the patriarch of the Fire Demon Clan. The patriarchs of the 6 clans had all appeared. They stood high in the sky, with twisted small worlds over their heads, and the will of the great path hanging down from their bodies. They made them look like real gods, causing the soldiers to tremble. As the patriarchs of the various clans joined the battle, the whole netherworld boiled. Rumble! The void was crushed. Tens of thousands of netherworld soldiers roared in the sky. They came from the distant void, bringing with them a terrible oppressive aura that went straight to Earth Prison. Meanwhile, Earth Prison, the craze for flatbread had gradually come to an end. The experts who had bought flatbread had returned to their senses. All the aristocratic families and clans sent out their armies to fight against the Nether Prison army under the leadership of their expert. Earth Prison was very strong, so Nether Prison had gathered its armies to fight against the Nether Prison army. This was a great show of respect to Earth Prison, but it was a disaster for Earth Prison. The army of the 9 Nether Prison clans was so strong that if the old Hades was still alive, he would not be able to lead Earth Prison's army to resist it. But now the old Hades Tenzang was long gone. How could Earth Prison resist it? In the border of Earth Prison, hundreds of thousands of soldiers had gathered. Everyone raised their heads and looked at the distant void. There, dark clouds pressed down on the city. Above the black clouds, there were many majestic figures. Their terrifying auras pierced through the sky and the earth. Buzz, an invisible barrier, appeared outside the infernal realm. A curtain of light separated the Nether Prison army and the Earth Prison army. The war seemed to be on the verge of breaking out. Acheron's little restaurant, the morning sun shone on the earth. Bufang opened the door of the restaurant, and a gust of cold wind blew in. The winter of Earth Prison seemed to be coming. Bufang looked at the deserted door, but his expression didn't change much. The customers who came to buy flatbread never came again. This was a signal. That was the start of the war. Nether Prison's invasion of Earth Prison was a war to defend their homeland. Bufang exhaled softly. He pulled a chair, placed it in front of the restaurant, and lay down on it. The sun shone down, making him feel warm. Squeak! No one knew when Little Who had jumped out of Yu's arms and landed on Bufang's belly. The little guy's lively eyes kept rolling around. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched as he rubbed the latter's head. With a wave of his hand, an explosive meatball appeared. Little Hu's eyes lit up. Grabbing the explosive meatball that Bufang handed over, he stood on Bufang's belly and ate it happily. Holding the explosive meatball in his little paws, his mouth bulged as he ate happily. Yu was wearing a black dress. Her straight legs were fair and attractive. She stood at the door, behind Bufang's chair. She raised her head and looked into the distance. In her pitch-black eyes, there seemed to be a bright light flowing. Earth Prison was her home. Although she had been banished, no matter what, Earth Prison was still her home. She still cared about the safety of her home. In the distant sky, there seemed to be a black hole expanding. It was a dark haze hanging over it. Suddenly, the chair made a squeaking sound. Bufang stood up from his seat and pushed little Hu, who was eating the explosive meatball, into Yu's arms. Under Yu's puzzled gaze with his hands clasped behind his back, Bufang strode forward. "Help me look after the store for a while. I'm going to pay off some debts." Bufang's words were directed at Yu. His words still lingered in Yu's ears. His figure had already disappeared in the hazy fog. Yu held little Hu in her arms, watching Bufang's disappearing figure without saying anything. Bufang walked out of the Acheron's restaurant and left the rebuilt Acheron city. He came out of the city. He strode forward as if he could shrink the ground into inches. With his hands clasped behind his back, his vermilion robe and hair fluttered in the wind. When he reached the bank of the Acheron River, he still didn't stop. With one step, he stepped into the Acheron River. He walked on the waves. In the distance, mist lingered on the surface of the river. A small boat was swaying as it approached. A sad flute sound lingered on the river. Chapter 1330. The Acheron River surged as usual. The crimson river water surged on it, with mournful souls howling and skeletons floating in the air. Bufang clasped his hands behind his back as he walked on the wave. The river breeze blew, making his hair and the sleeves of his vermilion robe flutter. A small boat drifted over from the distance. It was a lonely boat, and the sound of a flute could be heard. An old man wearing a bamboo hat and a straw raincoat sat in the boat, swaying back and forth. Bufang saw the boat from a distance, and the corners of his mouth twitched. With a flip of his hand, a jade jar that was smaller than the fist-sized one belonging to the great sage of the Acheron River fell into his hand. According to the size of this jade jar, it could only hold 3 cups of wine. However, 3 cups of wine were equivalent to 3 million nether crystals, which was a sky-high price. Swoosh, the little boat moved forward, breaking through the flowing water. Suddenly, the sound of the flute stopped. The sole fisherman raised his head, and his old face appeared under the bamboo hat. He seemed to see the thin figure in the distance. The sole fisherman's face twitched. "It's that young man again." The sole fisherman put away the bone flute, his face unsightly. Then, he grabbed the bamboo pole and slapped it against the Acheron River. On the surface of the river, the small boat gracefully swung its tail, changed its direction, and headed into the distance, planning to drift away. Obviously, the sole fisherman really didn't want to see Bufang. The corners of Bufang's mouth froze. The scene made him a little dumbfounded and speechless. Why did the sole fisherman turn around and run as soon as he saw him? When did he become so frightening? "Wait," Bufang called out softly. His voice exploded over the Acheron River. When the sole fisherman heard that, he was even more startled. His old face twitched even faster. Then, he whipped the bamboo pole. Boom! The water in the river surged as if it was about to explode. As for the small boat, it turned into a perfectly straight arrow and shot into the distance. It was extremely fast, riding the wind and breaking the wave. Bufang exhaled softly. Then, the vermilion robe on his body underwent a huge change, and a loud and clear vermilion bird cry resounded. A pair of flaming wings appeared on his back, and flaming feathers fluttered in the air. The tip of his foot touched the surface of the river, causing it to explode. Bufang's figure turned into a stream of light, rapidly chasing after the soul fisherman's small boat. Bufang was now a 9-transformation little saint, which was stronger than soul fisherman. It would be easy for him to catch up to him. Shortly after, Bufang caught up with the soul fisherman. "Why do you have to chase after me so bitterly?" The soul fisherman looked at Bufang, his face trembling violently as he said bitterly. That young man's cultivation base had improved so fast. He had reached the 9-transformation little saint level. He had met this young man 3 times, and each time, he was greatly surprised. The first time, this young man's cultivation base was still very weak, like an ant in his eyes. But at that time, this young man had a dog with him. The second time, this young man's cultivation base was still not strong, but strangely enough, he was able to fight against him. The third time, this young man had soared into the sky. It was completely beyond his imagination. His strength had surpassed him. How long had it been? Was this young man going to settle the score with him now? Bam! Bam! The bamboo pole quickly touched the surface of the river, causing it to explode unceasingly. It made the old man's small boat look like a stream of light. In other words, both of them had turned into streams of light, darting across the Acheron River. Boom! After a long time, they entered the wide river. There were no waves on the river. Finally, the small boat stopped moving. The soul fisherman sat back on the small boat, as if he had given up resisting. Bufang had a strange look on his face. He really didn't understand why this old fellow kept running. "This old man's old bones don't want to waste time with you. Today, I didn't bring the flower of helplessness, so it's useless for you to stop me," said the soul fisherman. He took off his bamboo hat, revealing his pale hair, each strand of which was curled up. "Who told you that I came to you today for the flower of helplessness?" Bufang glanced at the old man, twitching the corner of his mouth. The soul fisherman was taken aback. He looked at Bufang, his cloudy eyes filled with shock and uncertainty. Instead of asking for the flower of helplessness, this young man forced him to stop his boat. What was going on? Did he want to kill me? Bufang didn't say anything. His hand shook. Instantly, a jar of wine flew out, heading toward the soul fisherman. The soul fisherman was stunned. He raised his hand and caught the jar. "When I lent you the flower of helplessness, I said I would give you a jar of wine. Today is the time to repay the debt," Bufang said. His voice was calm. However, the old man couldn't stay calm. "You really just want to give me the wine?" The soul fisherman was surprised. Bufang nodded. The soul fisherman's cloudy eyes lit up and he relaxed. "I've received your wine. Let me go," said the soul fisherman. "I've received your wine. Let me go." Bufang glanced at the soul fisherman and didn't say anything. With a flip of his hand, a steaming fortune flatbread flew out. "I'll give you another flatbread. Consider it a thank you for the first petal of the flower of helplessness," Bufang said. After that, he stepped on the surface of the river, causing it to explode. His figure sped away, turning into a beam of light and disappearing into the hazy mist. The soul fisherman's withered hands grabbed the jade jar and the fortune flatbread. As he watched Bufang leave, his cloudy eyes glinted. "I've been fishing souls on the Acheron River for 10,000 years, and now, someone gives me wine. How strange!" The soul fisherman's dry, pale hair fluttered in the wind. A smile came from the bottom of his heart, and he sighed with emotion. Of course, it looked no different from crying. It had been a long time since he smiled from the bottom of his heart. Splash! As Bufang's feet stepped on the river, the water surged up like a bulge, turning into a roaring dragon. As his strength rose to the 9-revolution little saint, Bufang's control of his power became more skillful. He took a step forward. The flaming wings on his back disappeared, and the vermilion robe returned to its striped red and white appearance. Landing on the shore, Bufang clasped his hands behind his back and walked leisurely toward the restaurant. It was late at night. A lonely boat drifted on the Acheron River. The quiet Acheron River was full of fireflies. Black, withered trees grew on the shore, as if they had been struck by lightning. They were charred black. The little boat was anchored. The dim candlelight lit up the boat. The sole fisherman walked out of the boat. He took off his straw raincoat, revealing his skinny body. He sat on the deck of the small boat. A red candle was lit on the side of the boat, and the wax was continuously flowing down from it. The sole fisherman took out a clay jar and slapped the lid open. Immediately, a wailing remnant soul emerged. A look of disgust appeared in the old man's eyes, but he still brought the clay jar to his mouth. Gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. The sole fisherman drank the juice from the clay jars, which contained the remnant souls. Buzz, the sole fisherman, looked a little pained. His back was hunched, and he couldn't stop shaking. A long time later, the bright moon hung high in the sky. The sole fisherman heaved a sigh of relief. The power of this curse is getting stronger. After fishing souls for 10,000 years, I finally can't suppress it anymore. Sigh. His lordship has fallen. How can I resist fate? I'm just struggling at death's door. The sole fisherman heaved a sigh of relief. His cloudy eyes gazed at the reflection of the bright moon in the sky. The sparkling water made him lose his mind for a moment. His former glory surfaced in his eyes. His former high-spirited self. What a pity, at this moment, he suddenly wanted to drink wine. Drinking wine to drown one's sorrows, even though it would make one more sorrowful, was also a way to relieve one's worries. That was why the sole fisherman thought of the green jade jar. The good wine that mysterious young man had mentioned. A good wine brewed with the flower of helplessness. Young people nowadays really know how to have fun. The sole fisherman sighed. He took out the green jade jar. The jade jar wasn't big, about the size of half a fist. He cursed that young man's stinginess inwardly. The sole fisherman patted the lid of the jade jar. With a thud, the lid was opened. As soon as it was opened, the sole fisherman was stunned. Buzz, a thick aroma of wine seemed to turn into a long dragon baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, flying out of the jar and meandering in the sky. He took a deep breath. The aroma of the wine went into his body, soaking him in the strong aroma of the wine. This feeling, the sole fisherman's body began to shake. A seven-colored brilliance burst out from the wine jar and illuminated the heavens. It echoed the cold moonlight in the sky. This wine, for the first time, the sole fisherman's eyes showed shock. This wine gave him a sense of déjà vu. Could it be swish? The sole fisherman couldn't suppress the excitement in his heart. He carefully held the green jade jar, and his chapped lips moved closer to the green jade jar. Gulp! Immediately, the sweet wine flowed through his lips and into his mouth. At that moment, it was as if hundreds of flowers were blooming, and everything became clear again. The sole fisherman felt as if he was dozens of years younger in just a flash. With a sip of the wine, he found the feeling of being able to shake the world when he was young. Holding the jar, he gently closed his eyes. The sole fisherman couldn't suppress the excitement in his heart. Turbid tears rolled down from the corners of his eyes. On his body, there was a green brilliance that was constantly swirling, as if it was constantly fighting against the essence in the wine. However, the old man didn't care about that anymore. He seemed to think of something. Hurriedly, he took out a steaming flatbread from the shabby cloth bag hanging on his waist. Even after so long, the steam on the flatbread had not dissipated. He took a bite of the flatbread. As soon as the crispy flatbread entered his mouth, he felt a sense of satisfaction he had never felt before. Buzz, a stream of fresh light poured into the old man's mouth from the flatbread. It was the fortune energy. The fortune energy that belonged to the fortune flatbread. As the fortune energy entered his body, the sole fisherman's turbid eyes brightened. His aura underwent a monstrous change. It was climbing steadily. With a rumble, it broke through the barrier and rushed into the great sage's realm. The old man's wrinkled face had returned to his youthful appearance. He now looked like an inconspicuous middle-aged man. The old man touched his face. He was somewhat dazed. The fortune chi had actually restored him to his youthful appearance and strength. Unfortunately, this state couldn't last long. He could only stay in it for an hour. He seemed to think of something. The old man burst out laughing. His laughter rang out, lingering over the pitch-black Acheron River. The birds perched on the withered branches were alarmed. They flapped their wings and flew away. The body of the soul fisherman, who had become younger, seemed to be glowing. He took out a food box from the cabin. The food box was sealed by array formations. The corners of the soul fisherman's mouth curled upward. It's been too long. It's been so long that I've almost forgotten what his lordship told me to do. Now, the person I've been waiting for has finally arrived. It's time to send this food box out. The soul fisherman laughed and poured all the wine in the jade jar into his mouth. His aura skyrocketed, and the entire Acheron River changed color. Boom! His aura soared to the sky. The yellow spring river suddenly surged with monstrous waves. On the river, the flowers of helplessness were blooming beautifully. With the food box in hand, the soul fisherman stepped on the waves and disappeared in a flash. Acheron Valley. The great sage of Acheron, who was spitting fireballs with a dark face, suddenly frowned and looked in a direction. His eyes were a little surprised. The soul fisherman? That's not right. Why has this old man's aura changed so much? Is he rejuvenated? Forget it. It's none of my business. The great sage of Acheron shook his head and continued to study the fireballs with a dark face. In the dead of night, outside Acheron City, a formidable existence had arrived. His terrifying aura suppressed the void. Above his head, a small world was constantly vanishing. In that small world, everything was broken and destroyed. The soul fisherman stepped on the waves and came. Soon, he stepped into Acheron City. He landed and stopped outside Acheron's restaurant. He was here. The soul fisherman retracted his aura. Looking at Acheron's restaurant, his eyes became nostalgic. He placed the food box on the ground and knocked it 3 times. Then, he looked at the restaurant, not saying a word. In the restaurant, Bufang, who was sleeping soundly in his room, suddenly opened his eyes. He sat up on the bed, his pajamas slipping down, revealing his fair chest. His slender arms supported his neck as he looked at the door with a puzzled look. Chapter 1331. At the border of Earth Prison, imprisoned Dragon Pass, 2 armies faced each other, and a terrible aura spread. Earth Prison's defensive barrier floated between heaven and earth like an invisible barrier, isolating everything between heaven and earth. As the largest military city in Earth Prison's border, imprisoned Dragon Pass was magnificent. Its walls stretched for thousands of miles, and on top of them were Earth Prison experts. 2 Earth Prison overlords, Jin Jiao and Yin Jiao, stood on the wall, their black armor glowing coldly. Next to them were the top experts of Earth Prison's various aristocratic families. Most of them were 7 or 8 Revolution Little Saints, and there were also 9 Revolution Little Saint experts standing on top of them. In front of imprisoned Dragon Pass was a vast plain, which had been Earth Prison's battlefield since ancient times. Countless corpses were buried in it. Whether it was in the last age or this age, countless wars, big or small, had broken out. Beneath the battlefield were bones, corpses wrapped in horse leather, and blood flowing like rivers. Outside the barrier, magnificent Nether Prison battleships could be seen. The auras of Nether Prison experts lashed at the barrier like long whips, trying to break it. The top experts of Nether Prison had gathered together. Their terrible auras seemed to have turned into a giant demon, which swung a giant hammer. Once it smashed down, there might be a heaven-shaking explosion. Could Earth Prison withstand the attack of these experts? Many people were trembling. They couldn't figure it out. The horn of war had sounded. Once Nether Prison's attack began, rivers of blood would flow. This was a war to defend one's homeland. In the Black Temple, a rumble rang out. Inglong Prison Overlord and Hades' era flew out of it, walking in the air. Their auras were incomparably strong. The pressure of the great sage realm spread out in all directions. The good things in the Black Temple had already been divided up by them. It's time to go. The war has begun. Lord Hades, as the backbone of Earth Prison, you must be present. Inglong Prison Overlord looked at Hades' era and said seriously. Hades' era nodded. He glanced at the Black Palace. What about that lazy dog? Are we not going to wait for him? Hades' era frowned. Inglong took a deep look at the Black Temple. We don't need to worry about the Hellhound's safety. Its power is far beyond our imagination. Inglong said. In the next moment, he grabbed the Void Eye's scepter and bolted in the direction of the imprisoned Dragon Pass. Hades' era hovered in the void, glanced at the Black Temple, and let out a soft sigh. After that, he donned the Hades armor, his red cloak flapping noisily in the wind. Holding the Hades halberd in his hand, he sped across the sky like an arrow, following closely behind Inglong Prison Overlord. In the Black Temple, there was an oppressive aura surging, as if a great terror was boiling within. In front of Acheron's restaurant, the much younger soul fisherman looked at the lights in the restaurant, and a smile appeared on his face. Sure enough, the young man in this restaurant had something to do with his lordship. No wonder this young man could break through his cultivation base so fast. Anyone who had something to do with his lordship must be extraordinary. His ears twitched as he heard footsteps coming down the stairs. The soul fisherman laughed, turned around, and left with his hands clasped behind his back. His figure instantly disappeared into the night. However, no one knew where he was headed to. As he walked, the monstrous aura on his body gradually disappeared. The dark green power of the curse, which had been suppressed, once again spread and clung to his body. The soul fisherman turned back into an old man. He staggered, disappearing into the night. Creak. The door of the restaurant was opened. Bufang looked at the wooden food box outside the restaurant, confused. The strange energy fluctuation he had sensed in the restaurant came from this food box. Wrapping his pajamas, Bufang walked out of the restaurant. He picked up the food box and studied it carefully, but he couldn't figure out what it was. Then, he brought it back into the restaurant. With a thud, the door closed. Bufang placed the food box on the table. The lines on the food box were very mysterious. They looked a little old, and there were many traces of wear and tear. Bufang's slender fingers gently tapped on the table rhythmically. After a long time, Bufang was about to open the food box. However, as soon as his hand touched the seal on the box, it was bounced off. Looking at the seal, Bufang furrowed his brows. This is the confined gourmet array? Bufang couldn't believe it, but when he sensed the familiar energy fluctuation on the lines, he had to believe it. Although the lines of the confined gourmet array were different from Bufang's gourmet array, but the root cause was exactly the same. In other words, this gourmet array also came from the system? Why did this food box appear here? And what was with the array on the food box? What was the dish in the lunchbox? Bufang's eyes narrowed. The confined gourmet array appeared on his palm. To open this array, he had to attack it with the same array. This was the only way to truly break the formation. Crack! Crack! The two arrays collided. After a long time, the energy of the array was worn down. Then, the light dimmed. Bufang patted the food box. Instantly, the box opened with a crack. Bufang furrowed his brows. Then, he reached out his hand and opened the box. A rich aroma suddenly spread out from the food box. The aroma was vivid and rich. It was like a delicious meal that had just been cooked. Rays of sparkling and translucent light shot out from within, illuminating the entire world. Bufang's eyes were fixed on the dish in the box. It was a pig's trotter, a crystal-like trotter. The meat glistened, looking like a work of art, The aura of the will of the great path emitted from it was shocking. Bufang was shocked by this dish. He reached out his hand, wanting to taste it. However, as soon as his chopsticks touched the pig's trotter, it shattered like a mirror. Bufang's eyes shrank. He retracted his hand as if he had been electrocuted. The dish in the lunchbox slowly crumbled and turned into green smoke, dissipating into the air as if it was just an illusion. Disappeared? Bufang muttered under his breath. Then, the corner of his mouth twitched. With the confined gourmet array, it contained the will of the great path. Without a doubt, this dish was left behind by the previous host. Unfortunately, this dish turned into smoke and dissipated, not allowing him to have a good taste. As a chef, tasting delicious food was also a kind of enjoyment. Perhaps the previous host wanted to use this dish to tell me something, but you didn't even let me taste it. I won't believe anything you say. Bufang twitched his mouth. Moreover, Bufang had his own determination. His goal was to become the god of cooking, standing at the top of the food chain in the fantasy world. This goal would be his lifelong goal. No matter how difficult it was, he would not give up. Perhaps the previous host had left this dish behind to tell him that this path might be just like this dish, an illusion that he would never be able to reach. However, did Bufang care? He didn't care. What he cared about was the regret of not being able to taste this dish. Putting away the wooden box, Bufang's mouth twitched as he put it into the system's storage space. As a chef, what he needed to do was to cook good dishes. He didn't need to think too much about other things. Even if he needed to think too much, he would deal with it as it came. Click. The light went out. Bufang returned to his room, lying on his bed. After a while, his breathing became even. The path to becoming the god of cooking was like an unattainable illusion. Without experiencing it himself, how could he know? That night, Bufang had a sweet dream. It was a dream that made the corners of his mouth curl up. Although he was sleeping soundly, his face was still full of nostalgia and happiness. The next day, the morning star jumped out of the horizon. The sunlight shone on the earth, bringing warmth to the land that had been shrouded in cold for the whole night. Bufang woke up early and went to the kitchen. After practicing his knife skills, he began to cook. Sizzle, sizzle. In the kitchen, the fire was soaring. In the Black Turtle constellation walk, the fire was surging, and the ingredients were tumbling. A thick aroma spread out. A pleasant and leisurely day began once again. After practicing cooking, Bufang walked out of the restaurant with a steaming bowl of dragon blood rice. He was wearing a black dress, sitting elegantly in front of the table. Bufang placed the dishes in front of her. He took out a small plate with a few steaming hot explosive meatballs on it. Rubbing Little Hu's head, Bufang opened the door of the restaurant, pulling a chair and sitting at the door. In the distance, dark clouds shrouded, and a terrible pressure swept the world. That was the direction of the battlefield. The wind blew, bringing a faint warmth. Because of the start of the war, there were basically no diners in front of the restaurant. Hence, Bufang's mind flickered, entering the heaven and earth farmland. He was ready to study the new gourmet array time. Yesterday, when he saw the gourmet array on the food box, Bufang realized that perhaps the gourmet array's function was far more than that. The previous host's use of the gourmet array might be different from his. Perhaps the previous host didn't study any death food tool. However, they had studied other ways to use it. For example, using the imprison array as a seal and so on. Outside the imprisoned dragon pass, the nether prison experts hovered in midair. Stepping on a sword demon patriarch stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes indifferent and cold. However, there was a surging killing intent in the depths of his eyes. Fire demon patriarch was faintly discernible in the void, and his laughter kept spreading out. Shadow Demon Patriarch, Beastmaster Patriarch, and the other peak experts of the 9 clans had all arrived. Sword Demon Patriarch glanced at his old friends, and his eyes narrowed. That man's inheritor is in Earth prison. So this time, we must break into Earth prison and completely obliterate that man's inheritor. If Di Ting, Netherhow, and the others were here, they would definitely do the same. That man's inheritor? Fire Demon Patriarch's eyes were red, and his body was like a burning flame as he sneered. The next moment, a shrill cry exploded in the void. Of course he must die. Fire Demon Patriarch's aura soared, and it was so oppressive that it made it hard for people to breathe. That man has an inheritor. If he is allowed to grow, he will be a great threat. We must kill him while he's still a threat, a gloomy old man said. In his sleeve, there was a pitch-black snake slithering around with its tongue spitting out. In the sky, one nether prison warship after another was aimed at Earth prison's defensive barrier. The next moment, terrible energy surged out of the warships. Boom! Boom! The battleship was being bombarded with the power of a great sage attack, and it kept on slamming into the defensive barrier. They wanted to break the barrier. In Earth prison, every expert tensed up. When the barrier broke, the war would begin. Buzz Sword Demon Patriarch's eyes were cold. Behind him, a silver sword thrust into the sky. The cry of a sword rang through the void. Without Hades Tenzang, what is there to resist? Surrender obediently. The unification of the great netherworld cannot be stopped. Boom! In the sky, a sword light bloomed. The next moment, a terrible sword intent slashed toward the barrier. A loud rumble rang out, and a brilliant light illuminated heaven and earth. At this moment, the whole Earth prison seemed to see the blazing light in the sky. Under the sword strike of the 9 Revolution Great Sage, the surface of the barrier was instantly covered with densely packed veined patterns. The defensive barrier left by Nether King Tian Song was finally broken. Chapter 1332. A beam of sword light came from the sky. It slashed on Earth prison's barrier, instantly covering it with numerous fine cracks. As the cracks spread, the barrier collapsed in an instant. The experts of Earth prison and imprisoned Dragon Pass trembled, feeling a little cold. Looking up, they saw the Hell Rampart crumbling into countless crystalline fragments that rained down from the sky. It was like an icy rain had just fallen, and their hearts were chilled to the bone, and they felt a chill spreading out from the soles of their feet. In front of imprisoned Dragon Pass, on a vast battlefield that was thousands of miles wide, a sandstorm rose, sending sand and stones flying. In the sky, as Earth prison's barrier slowly disappeared, the surging auras of the Nether prison experts finally emerged completely. Warships gushed with energy, waiting to launch the most powerful attack, wanting to obliterate Earth prison in an instant. Every Nether prison battleship had experts standing on it. They were all clad in armor and looked majestic. They were the vanguard of each warship. Thump, thump, thump. Inside the Nether prison warships, the sound of war drums rang out. A shirtless burly man held huge drumsticks with both hands, beating the huge bronze drum placed on the warship. Every time he struck the drum, it seemed as if the drum would tremble. The drum was deafening, making people feel their spirit, energy, and spirit boil. This was the effect of the war drums. The eyes of the vanguard standing on the prow of the warships immediately lit up, and their auras surged. Roar! Battle cries rang out. The vanguard of each warship leaped out. A terrible aura soared into the sky, turning into a beam of light as it fell from the warship. Boom! 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 Loud booms rang out. Every vanguard fell to the ground, and the ground suddenly collapsed and sunk in. Cracks continued to spread. On the wall of imprisoned Dragon Pass, the experts from Hell tensed up as well. Facing the Nether prison vanguard, they naturally couldn't easily admit defeat. Prison Overlord Luo Ji's pink hair fluttered in the wind. She wore black armor, which vividly displayed her exquisite figure. A little yellow flag appeared in her hand. He suddenly waved the little yellow flag, and the netherworld aura entered it. This caused the little yellow flag to rise into the air and float in the air. Thousands of streams of light flickered within it. It was as if rays of light were dispersing. As the little yellow flag roared, outside imprisoned Dragon Pass, the battlefield that spanned thousands of miles suddenly rumbled. Beneath the ground, a dazzling array formation light surged into the sky. Buzz, the nether prison vanguards immediately rushed into the array like savage beasts. Boom! A rumbling sound rang out. These nether prison vanguards were not weak. They were all 5th or 6th revolution experts of the Little Saint. He charged into the formation and immediately collided with it, clashing head-on with it. In the sky, the beating of nether prison's war drums grew more and more intense. The drumbeats were rapid and they fell like a storm. Dong dong dong. Every beat of the drum seemed to be pounding on his mind. Bang! Some of the vanguards were crushed to pieces by the formation. There were also those who charged forward who forcefully withstood the impact of the formation, wanting to break through it. The roars and roars of indignation resounded in the sky continuously. Jin Jiao raised one foot, stepping on the wall. His eyes gazed at the vanguards in the formation below. His muscles were trembling with excitement. When Hades Tenzang led the Earth Prison Army to attack Nether Prison, he did not participate in that great battle. It was a regret in his heart. In that battle there were peerless experts such as Hades Tenzang, Earth Prison Dog, and so on. However, he did not see any of them. However, this time, he would not be absent from the great battle. Boom! A vanguard, covered in blood, rushed out of the array that spanned thousands of miles of the battlefield. Holding a long spear, he headed straight for imprisoned Dragon Pass. Jin Jiao roared. Grabbing a black iron long knife, he stepped on the wall, and his figure instantly flew down. Nether Prison evil beast, die! Boom! Jin Jiao roared, and a terrifying aura instantly burst out. Holding the long knife with both hands, he descended from the sky, landing on the ground. His feet stepped on the solid ground, facing the Nether Prison vanguard, whose eyes were red. A knife slashed out. The knife light swept over, speeding past. In an instant, it cut the vanguard into two halves. Blood mist suddenly filled the air. In the sky, the vanguard had broken through the formation. The warships roared. On them, figures jumped down one after another, landing on the ground. Their battle cries shook the sky. In an instant, countless Nether Prison experts rushed into the formation. On the city wall of imprisoned Dragon Pass, Luo Ji's face suddenly paled. The little yellow flag's radiance dimmed as it was torn apart. The Nether Prison's army rushed into the formation. It was as if a cavalry had trampled on the formation, causing it to collapse. This was the first wave of Nether Prison's attack. The attackers were experts under the Little Saint realm from the 9 clans of Nether Prison. They were also the main force of this war. After Jin Jiao killed the Nether Prison vanguard with one slash, his eyes were bright. Grabbing the corpse ghost soul sealing fan on his back, he shook his hand and the fan soared in the wind. In an instant it turned into a huge iron fan that was several meters tall. Jin Jiao stared at the army that was charging over. His terrifying murderous intent seemed to turn into a giant multicolored beast in the sky above the army. Jin Jiao's eyes turned red. Roaring, he grabbed the iron fan and swung it down. Boom! A tornado rose, turning into a long dragon, rolling toward the battlefield. Puff, puff, like a white steed crossing a crevice. Wherever the tornado passed, experts were sucked in, howling miserably. Inside the Nether Prison warship, A9 Revolution Little Saint stepped out, hovering in the air, facing the huge tornado. He reached out his hand, curling and opening his palm. Then, the soil on the ground flew up and climbed onto the tornado, wrapping the entire tornado up. Soon, a mud dragon appeared on the battlefield. The Nether Prison 9 Revolution Little Saint finally made his move. Creak. The gate of imprisoned Dragon Pass opened. Behind the gate, the waiting army roared and charged out, brandishing their spears and swords as they approached the nether prison army. Dong! 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 Of course, the war drums couldn't be left out. Above the imprisoned dragon pass, Luo Ji's face was pale. 8 war drums emerged around her, dancing like a fairy. Every time she beat the drums, a heart-stirring sound bloomed. The bugles of charging rang out, complementing the beating of the war drums. The army charged. Battle cries shook the sky. On the battlefield that spanned thousands of miles, the two armies charged at each other from 2 different sides of the battlefield. Like 2 collapsed dams, the river water poured down. At the same time, the waves soared to the sky, crashing into each other. Boom! The moment the 2 armies clashed, the sky turned dark. It was like the sky was falling and the earth was splitting. The sun and moon lost their light. The battle broke out instantly. Boom! 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 Every expert's aura burst out. They used all kinds of means, constantly bombarding and fighting with the enemy. The cruel war showed its terror in just a blink of an eye. Some nether prison experts had their bodies blown up, while some earth prison experts had their limbs cut off, blood splashed, and the miserable scene filled the world in an instant. However, the battle between the 2 armies was in a stalemate. In the sky in the void, a pale-faced old man with black snakes wriggling in his sleeves could be seen. "It's time for the experts of my Beastmaster clan to move out," the old man said lightly. The next moment, in a warship, one after another, nether prison experts clad in cloaks rushed out. These experts were all Little Saint Realm experts. After rushing out of the warship, they leaped down from the sky. Dozens of figures, each with a cold face, descended from the sky. As they descended from the sky and neared the ground, they crushed the jade talismans. Deafening bestial roars rang out, and one terrible savage beast after another appeared under them. Boom! They smashed into the ground, causing it to collapse. These Beastmaster clan experts rode savage beasts and charged over like monstrous waves. As soon as they entered the battlefield, it was as if there was no one there. The Earth prison experts were no match for them at all. They were smashed into minced meat by the savage beasts' claws, and the experts on the savage beasts pierced their heads with spears. At this moment, the bloody war was vividly displayed. Clad in armor, Yin Jiao stood on the city wall. Watching the savage beasts of the Beastmaster clan enter the battlefield, his cynical face suddenly turned serious. He raised his hand and slapped it hard on the city wall. Immediately, ripples spread across the entire wall. Deep black holes appeared on the city walls. Fallen god puppet. Shoot! Yin Jiao stood on the wall, his silver horn reflecting light. As his voice faded, mysterious fluctuations suddenly appeared in the black holes on the city walls. The next moment, a whistling sound rang out. It was as if the void was being torn apart and kept collapsing. Huge black crossbow bolts shot out of the black holes on the wall. Their targets were the nether prison savage beasts. Boom! The savage beasts slapped the ground with their claws and raised their bodies. However, the fallen god puppet arrived in the blink of an eye. It pierced through the beast's chest and pierced through the beast tamer on its back, causing blood to spray out like a river. With a loud boom, the giant beast fell to the ground and slid far away. Fallen god puppets flew over one after another. All of them pierced through the savage beasts of the Beastmaster clan, who were displaying their divine might as if they were invincible. "How dare you!" In the nether prison warship, seeing this scene, the 9 Revolution Little Saint of the Beastmaster clan flew into a rage. He slapped the table and rose to his feet, rushing over. Above the Earth prison's imprisoning dragon pass, a top 9 Revolution Little Saint of an aristocratic family was enraged, raising his finger and cursing. At the same time, the 9 Revolution Little Saint also rushed out and began to fight. The collision happened instantly. The collision between the 9 Revolution Little Saint level was not something to be underestimated. In an instant, the battle reached its climax. Armies collided with armies. Techniques collided with technique. At this moment, it was a battle between top experts. The war between Nether Prison and Earth Prison broke out in an instant. Rumble. In the sky, the experts with the Great Sage could no longer sit still. The Nether Prison's one revolution Great Sage made a move. When the Great Sage made his move, the pressure instantly changed. The terrible will of the Great Path rolled in the sky, making the Earth Prison experts on the battlefield nervous. The hearts of the experts on the imprisoned Dragon Pass sank. What they were most worried about had happened. The Nether Prison's Great Sage had made his move, and the Earth Prison's Great Sage was much weaker than him. If the Great Sage crushed his opponent, Earth Prison would be finished. Some of the experts from the aristocratic families turned pale. Some of them gritted their teeth and took out several steaming fortune flatbreads, ready to fight to the death. However, an explosion suddenly rang out in the sky. Two figures descended from the sky in a flash. "Do you really think Earth Prison is invincible?" A thunderous roar rang out. Clad in his Hades armor, Hades Era stepped through the air. Over the black Hades armor, towering nether energy soared into the sky as if it had turned into a roaring dragon. He waved the Hades halberd and swept it across the sky. At this moment, Hades Era was like a god descending to the mortal world. In the sky, he swept the halberd out. The light from the halberd turned into a crescent arc and swept across, knocking back the Nether Prison's Great Sage. Hades Era's small world emerged. A magnificent world was reflected in the sky, and the will of the Great Path surged in it. It completely crushed the Great Sage's will of the Great Path. Boom! The Nether Prison's little saint flew backward, coughing up blood. Clad in armor, Hades Era's eyes were cold as he held the halberd, and his momentum was overwhelming. He raised his head and faced the warships hovering in the sky, looking extremely domineering. He raised the halberd and pointed it at the enemy. Sword Demon Patriarch was indifferent. Stepping on a silver sword, he looked into the distance at imprisoned Dragon Pass, as if he was prying at something. "The Great Sage of Second Revolution and below must kill that guy for me," Sword Demon Patriarch said lightly. His voice spread out and resounded through the sky. The next moment, inside the warship, 8 figures stepped into the air. 8 great sages attacked at the same time. Their auras were linked together, as if they had turned into a huge wave. Hades Era narrowed his eyes. The difference between Earth Prison and Nether Prison was the number of great sages. The other side had 8 Second Revolution and 1 First Revolution great sage. On Earth Prison's side, only Hades Era was a great sage. On the wall, the little saints of the aristocratic families exchanged glances and gritted their teeth. Then, many of them took out steaming fortune flatbread. A crisp, crunching sound rang out. Each of them took a bite of the flatbread. A stream of fortune flowed into their hearts. After eating the fortune flatbread, the auras of the 9 Revolution little saints changed. Rumble. In Acheron's little store, Bufang narrowed his eyes and curled up in a chair. A cold wind was blowing, and the whole sky of Earth Prison was enveloped in darkness. Yu was holding Little Hu in her arms, looking a little restless. Suddenly, Little Hu jumped out of Yu's arms and into Bufang's arms. Bufang opened his sleepy eyes and looked over in confusion. Then, he saw Yu looking at him with a wronged expression. Bufang twitched the corner of his mouth. "If you want to go, just go." Bufang looked at Yu. He knew what she wanted, so he said lightly. Yu's black eyes flashed. Then, the Netherworld ship broke through the void. Yu glanced at Bufang, then jumped into the Netherworld ship. Sitting cross-legged on the ship's bow, her long hair fluttered in the wind, and her beautiful face had a hint of indifference. After all, Earth Prison was the Netherworld woman's home. She was also duty-bound to protect her home. Rumble Bufang slowly stood up from the chair, stroking Foxy's soft fur as he watched the Netherworld ship soar through the sky. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then, Bufang turned and went into the kitchen. He took out a clay pot and a dried pot. Chapter 1333. Naturally, the great sage could not choose to fight on the ground. Otherwise, as the aftermath of the battle spread, all the warriors fighting on the battlefield would be crushed to death. So, Hades' era rushed into the sky with the Hades halberd in his hand, broke through the clouds, and rushed into the battlefield of the stars. The battlefield of the stars was a battlefield that belonged to the great sage. Here, experts at the level of the great sage could unleash their supreme power without fear of affecting everything on the ground. Boom! In the battlefield of the stars, one figure after another chased after him. Clad in the Hades armor, Hades' era's cloak flapped noisily behind him. Holding the Hades halberd, he hovered in the battlefield of the stars. Around him, 8 great sage experts, who were in the first and second revolution, surrounded him. The aura of these great sage experts almost shook heaven and earth, putting tremendous pressure on Hades' era. The 8 great sage experts surrounded him, which was also a test for him. After all, he was only one person. 8 great sages could gang up on him and beat him to death. Boom! His sharp eyes swept across the sky. Hades' era was very calm. Compared with Nether Prison, Earth Prison was at a disadvantage in terms of the number of great sage experts. Nether Prison's great sage completely crushed Earth Prison in terms of the number of great sage experts. Therefore, if Earth Prison wanted to win this war, it had to fight against several great sage experts at once. Otherwise, once the other great sage experts were free, it would be a disaster for Earth Prison. Therefore, Hades' era had to stop the 8 great sage experts in front of him. He breathed a soft sigh of relief. Hades' era's eyes suddenly became sharp. Hades swept out his halberd, streaking through the air in a circular arc, and rushed out in all directions. The great sage of Nether Prison stared coldly at him and attacked in a flash. In the battlefield of the stars, a fierce battle broke out. Hades' era fought against 8 experts at once. In imprisoned Dragon Pass, on the city wall, many 9 revolution little saints of the aristocratic families took a bite of the fortune flatbread. Speaking of which, this biscuit was quite strange. It actually paid particular attention to luck, using luck to obtain good fortune. This kind of situation was very rare. Kacha kacha. The crisp sound resounded throughout the walls of the entire imprisoned Dragon Pass. On the Nether Prison side, many experts gazed into the distance and saw the scene on the imprisoned Dragon Pass clearly. However, it was precisely because he could see it clearly that he was dumbfounded. Because he discovered that those experts were actually eating flatbread. Eat pancakes? It's such a serious battle, and you're eating biscuits? Many Nether Prison experts looked at each other, puzzled. If Earth Prison's people are all so stupid, then they deserve to be destroyed by our Nether Prison. A Nether Prison expert sighed with emotion. Suddenly, above the walls of the imprisoned Dragon Pass, waves of terrifying chi soared into the sky. Buzz, the auras of these experts who had eaten the flatbread suddenly changed. A mouthful of fortune gas had transformed them. The head of a 9 revolution little saint family had his hair stand up like steel needles, but his aura was several times stronger than before. He took a step forward and vanished into the void like a ghost. This 9 revolution little saint actually obtained the speed of the extreme realm. Even an ordinary great sage would not dare to underestimate such speed. A loud laugh rang out. Then, this expert from an aristocratic family charged into the battlefield in front of him. He was so fast that he moved like a ghost. As soon as he entered the battlefield, no one could stop him. In the blink of an eye, he had stalled 2 9 revolution little saint and even seriously injured one. Boom! The little saint of the fire demon clan struck. Monstrous flames destroyed everything as he pressed toward the battlefield. Meanwhile, on the imprisoned Dragon Pass, an expert obtained the fortune of the water element. He was surrounded by monstrous water currents as if he had turned into a water demon. His comprehension of the water element had reached the extreme. Rumble! A water dragon rushed out and immediately pressed the little saint of the fire demon clan to the ground. Ha ha! I'm very lucky. An expert with fluttering long hair laughed. His aura rose steadily, and suddenly, he broke through the shackles of the 9-revolution little saint and stepped into the 2-revolution great sage realm. A terrible aura suppressed the whole battlefield. This expert, who had broken through and become a great sage, immediately soared into the sky and joined the battlefield of the stars to help Hades' era. With the addition of this great sage, Hades' era was a little confused. He never knew that there was such a great sage in Earth Prison. The Nether Prison camp was already dumbfounded. Looking at the Nether Prison experts who seemed to be on steroids, they were a little stunned. However, what made them feel better was that Nether Prison still had the upper hand on the battlefield. After all, the foundation of Nether Prison experts was stronger than that of Earth Prison. As long as they persisted, Earth Prison would be completely defeated. Suddenly, the Nether Prison commanders in the warships widened their eyes. They looked incredulously at the battlefield, which had been turned around in an instant. All of them were completely stunned. On the battlefield, the Earth Prison little saints who were fighting each other had all pulled away from their enemies. Each and every one of them took out a piece of piping hot flatbread from their hand. Eating flatbread in the middle of a battle? Are you looking down on Nether Prison? A Nether Prison expert roared, as if he had been insulted. He was furious. No. I'm just eating a flatbread to calm down, the Earth Prison expert answered. After eating the flatbread, the fortune gas entered his mouth. The Nether Prison expert was so lucky that his cultivation base rose several levels in an instant. He crushed the Nether Prison expert and stabbed him to death with a knife. This kind of scene kept happening on the battlefield. Those experts who had eaten the flatbread, whether or not, had all improved by quite a bit. Some people's cultivation base was rising like a madman. Some of the 9-revolution little saint had even broken through to the great sage realm. This F***king, Nether Prison's original advantage, had suddenly turned into a great disadvantage. It wasn't just Nether Prison. Even many people in Earth Prison were dumbfounded. Hovering in midair, Inglong Prison Overlord was puzzled as he watched the Earth Prison experts eat the flatbread and grow stronger. What kind of spirit pill was this flatbread? It could make the little saint's cultivation base soar in an instant and give him a chance to step into the great sage realm? However, Inglong Prison Overlord didn't have time to wonder, because the Nether Prison camp's great sage, who was even stronger, had made his move. He was going to crush the Earth Prison camp with the number of great sage realm experts. Nether Prison evil beasts, don't be so arrogant. Inglong Prison Overlord's eyes were bright. He smashed the hollow eye staff down, causing the void to tremble and powerful waves to spread. Inglong Prison Overlord strode down, pulled the Nether Prison's 5-revolution great sage realm experts into the battlefield of the stars, and the battle began. However, with Inglong Prison's cultivation base, he naturally crushed the great sage realm expert. The Nether Prison camp, on the other hand, was unwilling to give up. 2 more great sage realm experts soared into the sky, one 7th revolution and the other 6th revolution. They were already the strongest experts under the great sage realm expert. The rest were the Nether Prison's 9-revolution great sage realm experts, who were the patriarchs. However, those patriarchs seemed to be waiting for something. Hovering in midair, they looked down at the battlefield with expressionless faces. Rumbling filled the battlefield of the stars. Terrible wills of the great path collided with each other and kept crushing each other. With the Hades halberd and Hades armor, Hades' era's strength had increased a lot. He managed to seriously injure several Nether Prison great sage realm experts. With the help of the great sage realm expert, who had never seen Earth Prison, he won. The 8 Nether Prison great sage realm experts who had besieged Hades' era realm experts were seriously injured and fled. One of them was even pierced by Hades' era's halberd and lifted up. The remaining 7 fled the battlefield of the stars. Hades' era, who had passed the Demon King Pass, was extremely domineering. Boom, boom. On the battlefield, all the experts raised their heads. They looked up at the sky. There, a figure in black armor, with a red cloak fluttering behind him, held the Hades halberd in one hand, and a Nether Prison First Revolution Great Sage Realm expert was hanging on the halberd. The Great Sage's blood kept dripping from the tip of the halberd and falling on the battlefield like boulders. It was a shocking scene. All the Nether Prison experts were terrified. The Earth Prison experts, on the other hand, roared and cheered excitedly. Lord Nether King's victory was like a shot of adrenaline for them. This caused their fighting spirit to surge. Kill! Earth Prison's momentum soared. It suppressed many Nether Prison experts and made them shiver. With the help of the Fortune Flatbread, they fought back and forced the Nether Prison experts back hundreds of miles. Countless Nether Prison experts died tragically on the spot. My big brother Era is so handsome. On the wall, Luo Ji's face was pale, and her eyes were shining like stars. Looking at Hades' Era, who had killed a First Revolution Great Sage Realm expert like a god, she fell in love instantly. Yuji's eyes were shining as she stared at him. However, soon Yuji's pupils constricted. Because she realized the real top experts of the Nether Prison camp had made a move. The 6 experts, who had never made a move and seemed to be guarding the void, had finally made their move. The 6 supreme existences were the real reliance of Nether Prison. Once they made their move, it would be the beginning of Earth Prison's nightmare. Hee, an eerie laugh resounded across the sky and lingered in everyone's ears. The next moment, a fireball that looked like a scorching sun flew out of the void. Scorching heat, accompanied by a monstrous pressure, filled the whole area. The pressure made everyone feel as if they were suffocating and couldn't breathe. This is the Fire Demon Patriarch, an expert from the Earth Prison camp said bitterly. The Fire Demon Patriarch was the top great sage of the 9 Nether Prison clans. Each of them was the top fighting force in the Netherworld. Once such an expert made a move, the Fortune Flatbread could not help improve his strength. Earth Prison, was he really going to lose? Hades' Era looked at the terrible existence that was descending like the scorching sun. Under the scorching sun, he was as small as an ant. The Nether King halberd flicked out, and the body of the Nether Prison Great Saint exploded in an instant. With a ripping sound, he turned into a mist of blood. Hades' Era pointed the halberd at the Fire Demon Patriarch. The Fire Demon Patriarch's cold voice rang out. You're overestimating yourself. If it were your father, Hades Tenzang, I might have to retreat a little. As for you, you're just an ant. Amidst the flames, a figure shrouded in flames emerged. The flames had turned into beard and hair. He looked very old, but his aura was as hot as the sun. Rumble! A flaming whisker swept over fiercely. Hades' Era let out a long roar. The Hell King halberd swept horizontally, slashing out a few streaks of light that bombarded the barrier. Only then did he manage to scatter the flame whisker. However, even so, white steam rose from Nether King Erha's body. This Fire Demon Patriarch gave him much more pressure than the Black Demon of the Black Temple. After all, Black Demon's hand was suppressed by the power of the law, and he had less than 1/10 of his strength. Even so, it was difficult for him to deal with Black Demon even if he joined forces with Yinglong. Now, this Fire Demon Patriarch was a powerful 9 Revolution Great Sage. There was no way he could stop him. At the critical moment, "Where's that mangy dog?" Hades' Era gritted his teeth, sweat trickling down his forehead. With the mangy dog gone, no one in Earth Prison could stop the patriarchs of the 9 clans. The void in the distance was suddenly torn apart. A netherworld ship swayed as it flew out of it. The netherworld ship floated above imprisoned Dragon Pass. You sat at the bow. When she saw you, her pupils constricted. "Why are you here? It's so dangerous here." Yuji's face turned unsightly when she saw Yu. "I've come to help you," Yu said, looking at her. Of course, Yu's appearance didn't attract too much attention. At this moment, everyone's attention was focused on Fire Demon Patriarch and Hades' era in the void. This battle would determine the overall situation of the war. Fire Demon Patriarch was too lazy to enter the battlefield of the stars. After all, there was no need to enter the battlefield to deal with a Second Revolution Great Sage. With his strength, he could directly obliterate him. Boom! All of a sudden, Fire Demon Patriarch's scarlet eyes narrowed. The next moment, he turned his hand and threw a palm at Hades' era. This palm seemed to have gathered the origin of all the flames between heaven and earth, burning fiercely and twisting the void. It slapped toward Hades' era. Almost in a flash, it sealed all the space around Hades' era, making it impossible for him to escape. Under this palm, there was the intent to kill. Without Hades' Tenzang, your Earth prison is just making a meaningless resistance. Fire Demon Patriarch's voice resounded through the sky. Under this palm, even Hades' era felt a little despair. In the imprisoned Dragon Pass, everyone's faces were pale, and their bodies were shaking. Once Hades' era died in battle, it would be a major blow to Earth prison's morale. You raised her head and frowned slightly. The giant flaming palm kept approaching. Suddenly, in the distance, a burst of laughter rang out. The voice exploded in the air. Everyone jerked their heads around to look. "You Fireball, are you an idiot? Do you think I don't exist? Do you know that I've watched Hades' Tenzang grow up?" Roar. A dragon roar rang out. In the distant sky, a huge blood-colored illuminating dragon flapped its wings and flew over. Above the illuminating dragon's head, two figures stood. One was the great sage Acheron, who was holding a jade wine jar in one hand. The other was a slightly thin figure. In the face of the flaming palm that was almost approaching Hades' era, the great sage Acheron flicked his finger, and a stream of Acheron water fell from the sky. All of a sudden, it crashed into the giant flaming palm. Chapter 1334. A stream of blood-colored water fell from the sky and collided with the giant flaming palm. This was not just a simple collision of energy, but also a brief confrontation between the will of the great path. Sizzle! Sizzle! The river water and the flames entangled, bursting out with a monstrous aura. Terrible energy kept rumbling and exploding. The next moment, in front of everyone's horrified eyes, the flames and the river water blended and disappeared, turning into steam that filled the sky. Whoosh! The huge blood-illuminating dragon flapped its wings and landed on the warship. A terrible rumble rang out. The majestic pressure of the blood-illuminating dragon scared the people around it into silence. This huge blood-illuminating dragon was also a being in the great sage realm, and its strength was very terrifying. On its head, in addition to great sage Acheron, there was also a thin figure. The figure was none other than Bufang. Bufang sat on it with a calm face, his vermilion robe fluttering lightly in the wind. "I'll leave the rest to you." Bufang glanced at great sage Acheron and said. Great sage Acheron waved his hand. Bufang thought for a moment. Then, two flatbreads appeared in his hand, and he handed them to great sage Acheron. Great sage Acheron refused at first when he saw the flatbreads. When he thought of the fireballs he had to spit out day and night, he felt very sad. "Take it. A person's luck can't always be like this," Bufang comforted him after thinking for a moment. Great sage Acheron thought about it and agreed. Could his luck be worse? So, he took the flatbreads from Bufang. Fire Demon Patriarch naturally saw the flatbreads Bufang handed to great sage Acheron. The flames in her eyes burned fiercely. "You should be the inheritor of that person that sword geezer mentioned. Indeed, only the inheritor of that person can cook this kind of flatbread." The Fire Demon Patriarch stared at Bufang with a hint of playfulness in his eyes. Bufang, on the other hand, was very calm as he glanced at Fire Demon Patriarch. Then, he took a step forward. He walked out of the Torch Dragon's back and landed on the walls of the imprisoned Dragon Pass. Yu's dark eyes stared at Bufang. "Bufang, why are you here?" Yu looked at Bufang and asked. "Business isn't good and it's boring to stay in the restaurant. So I came out for a stroll." Bufang folded his hands behind his back and answered expressionlessly. After hearing that, Yu didn't ask anything else, as if she had tacitly agreed with Bufang's answer. Yuqi was also somewhat speechless. What did it mean to be bored and come to the battlefield for a stroll? Was the battlefield a place to play? If one was not careful, one could die here. Yuqi really had a headache for Bufang. "I can't believe he asked you to come to such a dangerous place." Although Yu's cultivation base has broken through and you've become stronger than your sister, you're still on this battlefield. Once the great sage discovers Yu's secret, it will definitely be a disaster. He seemed to see the anxiety in Yuqi's eyes. Bufang twitched the corner of his mouth and said faintly, "Don't worry, it's okay. I'm here." In the sky, the patriarch of the Fire Demon clan let out a shrill laugh. His body turned into a ball of fire and sped toward Great Sage Acheron. Yellow Spring Great Sage didn't retreat. Instead, he launched a counterattack. Instead, he threw out a backhand attack, forcing the Fire Demon Patriarch to take several steps back. Great Sage Acheron's cultivation base was indeed strong, and he wasn't afraid of Fire Demon Patriarch at all. A bestial roar rang out. In the distance, on a nether prison warship, the old man, who was playing with a long black snake in his hand, stepped out. He snapped his fingers. Even the void seemed to tremble. "Little baby, come out and get some fresh air." The corner of Beastmaster Patriarch's mouth twitched. The next moment, he snapped his fingers, and the array rumbled. The array suddenly emerged in the void, and a behemoth was about to crawl out of it. Squeak! A black shadow suddenly emerged in the array. It was so huge that it blotted out the sky. It was actually a gigantic pitch-black bat. The bat emerged and spread its wings, which stretched as far as the eye could see. As its wings flapped, it turned into a stream of light and swooped toward Great Sage Acheron. Great Sage Acheron clasped his index finger and thumb together and blew into his mouth. The blood-illuminating dragon, who had almost fallen asleep, widened its eyes, flapped its wings, soared into the sky, and swatted the huge bat down. Boom! 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 The two behemoths wrestled with each other on the ground. Beastmaster Patriarch and Fire Demon Patriarch attacked at the same time, forcing Great Sage Acheron into the battlefield of the stars. Great Sage Acheron was a veteran Great Sage of Earth Prison, and he was very strong. Although he did not follow Hades' Tenzang to attack Earth Prison, the experts of Earth Prison knew him very well. After all, he was a 9-revolution Great Sage. How could they not know him well? Boom! The three Great Sages killed their way into the battlefield of the stars. In a flash, their auras completely enveloped the battlefield. Yinglong, Earth Prison Overlord, and the others were forced to a corner. Great Sage Acheron looked imposing. In his hand, he held a jade wine jar. After carefully putting it away, Great Sage Acheron looked at the two people opposite him. Fire Demon Patriarch and Beastmaster Patriarch. They were the two most famous experts of the 9 clans. Among the 9 patriarchs, their strength was at the 9-revolution Great Sage level. Of course, there were strong and weak Great Sages among the 9-revolution Great Sage. If Di Ting and the Nether Puppeteer clan's patriarch appeared, Great Sage Acheron did not dare to say that he could fight them alone. However, if it was Fire Demon Patriarch and Beastmaster Patriarch, Great Sage Acheron still dared to fight them. Boom! 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 With a thought, an Acheron river surged above Great Sage Acheron's head, as though it had turned real. Suddenly, it rushed forward. A great battle broke out in an instant. On the battlefield, when the great sage moved to the battlefield of the stars, the haze that shrouded everyone's hearts completely dissipated. The stench of blood spread across the battlefield. Bufang stood on the wall of imprisoned Dragon Pass, looking down at the murderous battle below. His face grew slightly serious. "Owner Bu, have you brought any fortune flatbreads to sell?" Suddenly, just as Bufang was in a daze, a little saint expert from an aristocratic family suddenly appeared and said to Bufang. Bufang was taken aback. "With the fortune flatbreads, even the smallest fortune can enhance our strength. When such a small amount of power converges into a river, it will be very huge. Perhaps it can help us win this battle." This little saint expert was obviously a beneficiary of the fortune flatbreads. Looking at his excited look, Bufang couldn't help but click his tongue. However, Bufang's mind flickered. Each person could only buy 3 fortune flatbreads a day, but today was a new day, he could sell them again. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. After arguing with the system in his mind, he finally asked the system to move the charcoal oven here. "I can sell them. Give me time to make the flatbreads." "Stay calm. Don't be reckless." Bufang thought for a moment and said. After that, Bufang took out the White Tiger Heaven stove, the charcoal oven and flour, and began to make the fortune flatbreads. Many people in the surroundings were in a daze as they stared blankly at Bufang, watching him cook in full swing in front of the battlefield. They were somewhat speechless. Luo Ji and Yu Ji rolled their eyes. Did this fellow come all the way to the battlefield just to sell flatbreads? Sizzle, hot steam rose into the sky. The oven was set up and the flames were burning. One by one, the flatbreads were slapped onto the wall of the oven by Bufang. Bufang sat cross-legged on the ground, spread his divine will, and began the most important part of making flatbreads. Meanwhile, the battle on the battlefield had reached a white-hot stage. Because an hour had passed, the strength of the experts who had obtained the power from the fortune flatbreads had declined, so the nether prison experts had regained the upper hand. The earth prison experts kept retreating. Boom! Sword Demon Patriarch and the others looked at each other and saw the grave look in each other's eyes. Sure enough, that chef's flatbreads can lead this war. Sword Demon Patriarch said. Shadow Demon Patriarch and Nether Chef Patriarch narrowed their eyes, while Horned Demon Patriarch sneered. Then let's kill that little chef. If he is really that man's inheritor, it will be difficult to kill him if he hides in the shop. But, since he dares to come to the battlefield, this is our chance to kill him. Horned Demon Patriarch grinned. Then, he rushed out with large strides. Rumble! At this moment, the whole world seemed to shake. A huge 3-horned rhinoceros emerged, its horn pointing at the sky as it charged toward the wall of imprisoned Dragon Pass. The tip of the horn was pointing at Bufang. The great sage of the Horned Demon clan was targeting Bufang. The faces of Luo Ji, Yu Ji, and the others turned very unsightly. They never thought that the 9 Revolution Great Sage would attack imprisoned Dragon Pass, regardless of his status. On the battlefield, when the Nether Prison experts saw this, their fighting spirit rose, and they became excited. Their killing intent swept across the battlefield, forcing the Earth Prison army to retreat. Hades Era bellowed. Holding the Hades halberd, he made a move to stop Horned Demon Patriarch. Unfortunately, he felt like a moth flying into a flame. Horned Demon Patriarch was the 9 Revolution Great Sage, and his strength was too strong. Bufang sat cross-legged on the ground, his divine will enveloping the charcoal oven. Although he sensed Horned Demon Patriarch's attack, he remained as still as a mountain. You raised her wrist. Her aura began to fluctuate as she stood in front of Bufang. Suddenly, the void in front of you was torn apart. Crack! Crack! It was as if ice crystals were spreading out. A graceful figure slowly walked out of the void. It was a peerlessly beautiful figure. Her beauty was breathtaking, and as soon as she appeared, she became the focus of the whole scene. As soon as Ice Saint appeared, she gave you a complicated look. He sighed softly. Then, she raised her hand. The veil slid down, revealing her jade-like arm. She waved her arm and threw a palm in the direction of the horned beast ancestor. Boom! The palm fell and ice crystals gathered in the sky. Horned demon patriarch immediately retreated, his eyes widening. The crazy woman of God Vanishing Mountain? How dare you leave the Forbidden Land? Horned demon patriarch roared. Buzz, Sword Demon Patriarch, and the other 9 Revolution Great Sage appeared beside Horned Demon Patriarch. Hovering in the clouds, they watched the peerless woman from a distance. I didn't kill you last time, but you dare to show up again. This time you will die. You don't need to go back to God Vanishing Mountain, Sword Demon Patriarch said coldly. Sword Demon Patriarch said coldly. Boom, boom. In the sky, the auras of the 4-9 Revolution Great Sage Patriarchs erupted like a volcano that was about to erupt. Sword Demon, come and help me. Suddenly, a cry for help came from the battlefield of the stars. The Patriarchs, who were about to attack Ice Saint, changed their expressions. 2 against 1 and you still need help? When did Great Sage Acheron become so strong? The expressions of Sword Demon Patriarch and the others changed slightly. Buzz Bufong, who was sitting cross-legged in front of the oven, opened his eyes. He exhaled softly. The next moment, he reached out, took the flatbread out of the oven, and put it into the basket. Thank you for your help. Here, I'll give you a flatbread. Bufong glanced at Ice Saint, the corners of his mouth twitching. He grabbed a steaming fortune flatbread and threw it to her. After catching it, Ice Saint gave Bufong a puzzled look. Do you want to know what a flatbread is for? You'll know when you go up there and have a look, Bufong said, pointing mysteriously at the battlefield of the stars. Ice Saint narrowed her eyes. Then, her aura surged, and her graceful figure swayed as she soared into the sky. On the battlefield of the stars, Great Sage Acheron opened his mouth and spat out a fireball. The fireball's scorching heat twisted the void, startling both Fire Demon Patriarch and Beastmaster Patriarch in the distance. Great Sage Acheron could breathe fire? Was this the old fellow's new fighting skill? Great Sage Acheron sneered as he glanced at the frightened Fire Demon Patriarch and Beastmaster Patriarch. Then, he took out the fortune flatbread given to him by Bufong, opened his mouth, and bit it with a crunch. It was a familiar feeling and a familiar crispness. The familiar fortune energy poured into his body. Great Sage Acheron put his palms together and placed them on his forehead, as if he was praying for luck. In the distance, Fire Demon Patriarch and Beastmaster Patriarch were a little stunned. Suddenly, Great Sage Acheron opened his eyes and burst out laughing. A terrible aura burst out of Great Sage Acheron, rippling in all directions. I told you that my luck can't be so bad all the time, Acheron. Ah. You're a pig farmer, aren't you? Go to hell. Great Sage Acheron's eyes shone brightly. His aura kept climbing, as if he had broken through some shackles and rushed into a higher level. A strand of hair fell from Great Sage Acheron's head. Great Sage Acheron's pupils constricted. He wiped his hair over his head. All of a sudden, all his hair fluttered. What's going on? Great Sage Acheron froze. Why did he lose his hair? I'm a 9 Revolution Great Sage. How could I lose my hair? Is this the price I have to pay to become stronger? Great Sage Acheron touched his cold bald head, suddenly feeling a little sad. Is this good luck or bad luck? It's the same as obtaining the permanent fire-breathing skill. He really had the luck of making fools of people. Buzz, thinking of the bald head's sadness, Great Sage Acheron's aura immediately locked on Fire Demon Patriarch and Beastmaster Patriarch. I've become stronger, but I'm also bald because of you. I'm bald, so it's time for you to suffer my wrath. Boom. The battlefield of the stars suddenly exploded. A terrible power swept out. Hell Overlord Ing Long and the others were startled again. They looked straight into the distance, dumbfounded. A stream of light flew by. Fire Demon Patriarch didn't even have time to dodge, and he was punched. This punch almost scattered the fire on Fire Demon Patriarch's body. The power of this punch was so terrifying. Chapter 1335. One punch. It almost killed the Fire Demon Patriarch. That was Fire Demon Patriarch, one of the 9 strongest experts in Nether Prison, the 9 Revolution Great Sage, whose cultivation base was mighty and whose name shook the world. But in a flash, he couldn't even dodge, and he was almost killed. The monstrous flames around him were dim, and he was almost knocked out of the battlefield of the stars. It was really terrifying. Yinglong and the others all held their breath. Not only him, but the great sage who fought Yinglong also gasped when they saw the terrifying strength of the great sage Acheron. Is this the great sage of Earth Prison? Why is he so terrifying? Does losing hair increase his strength? Is the Baldy stronger? Are all the monks in the West Little Buddhism realm going to ascend to the heavens? A loud rumble rang out. It was like a comet sweeping across the sky. The Fire Demon Ancestor, who was blasted away, shot out and slammed into a meteor that was flying by. The impact caused a huge pit to appear on the meteor, and it almost pierced through the meteor. Whoosh! Fire Demon Patriarch's eyes widened as he crawled out of the pit. His chest was deeply sunken, and there seemed to be magma-like mucus flowing in it. That was his blood. It had been many years since he was stabbed by the halberd when he attacked Hades Tenzang. Since then, he had never bled again. But now, his body was blown up by the great sage Acheron's punch. You're courting death. Fire Demon Patriarch's eyes turned completely cold, and his killing intent towered into the sky. In the distance, Beastmaster Patriarch was already taken aback. The strength that erupted from the great sage Acheron shocked him. The oppressive aura pressed against his chest like a boulder, making him not dare to breathe loudly. He didn't quite understand why the great sage Acheron's cultivation base had become so strong. Do you know why I'm so strong? It was all because of you. The great sage Acheron's eyes turned gloomy as he hovered in the void. He raised his hand and touched his bald head. For a moment, his heart was filled with grief. 3,000 strands of worry falling off in one day, what a heartbreaking thing. The great sage Acheron let out a long sigh. In this situation, only violence could express the anger in his heart. Boom! The great sage Acheron said. His figure instantly flew across the void like a phantom. The forefather of Beastamers narrowed his eyes. His figure burst forth. However, just as he moved, the face of the great sage Acheron appeared in front of him. You, the old Beastmaster Ancestor, was frightened out of his wits. How could he possibly block such a speed? Die! The Beastmaster Ancestor was so anxious. He waved his sleeve, and a black shadow shot toward the great sage Acheron. It was a long, pitch-black snake with shining scales and a pitch-black forked tongue. At first glance, one could tell that it was extremely venomous. As soon as the snake shot out and bit him, even the great sage would suffer. However, there was a cracking sound. The snake's head was pinched. The great sage Acheron's bald head shone as if it was reflecting the starlight under the starry sky. His thumb and index finger pinched, and with a sudden force, the head of the snake was crushed by the great sage Acheron. You little snake, you opened your mouth so wide. Are you laughing at me? The great sage Acheron said coldly, his face expressionless. The beast-tamer ancestor's heart ached when he saw his snake's head crushed. That was a rare species, and it was the only venomous snake in the entire netherworld. Boom! However, before he could recover from his heartache, a punch suddenly enlarged in front of his eyes. It hit him in the chest. The beast-tamer ancestor's eyes widened, and everything seemed to stand still at this moment. His body bent over, and he coughed out blood from his mouth. There was a loud bang. His body flew backward, and with a sonic boom, he smashed hard into a meteorite. After sending 2 9-revolution Great Sage flying with 2 punches, the Great Sage Acheron touched his bald head. His eyes were sad. Swoosh, beneath the battlefield of the stars, in the clouds that filled the sky. The sound of something piercing through the air rang out. One figure after another emerged from the clouds. Ice Saint's long hair fluttered in the wind, and her white veil fluttered, making her look like a peerless immortal. Stepping on a silver sword, the Sword Demon Patriarch rushed into the battlefield of the stars. Horned Demon Patriarch and the other great sages followed him. From a distance, they saw the great sage Acheron standing in the starry sky. His terrible aura spread as if to intimidate everyone. The Sword Demon Patriarch's pupils constricted, and he felt a little incredulous. How could the great sage Acheron's cultivation base be so strong? He felt as if he had broken through the shackles and reached a higher realm. Could he be the great sage of the perfected realm? That was a realm that only Di Ting had reached. A little surprise came over Ice Saint's beautiful face. Looking at the bald Acheron, she blinked. "Yo, little sister, you're here." When the great sage Acheron saw Ice Saint, he grinned. Ice Saint's face returned to its cold expression. She glanced at the great sage Acheron, then at the Fire Demon Patriarch and the Beast Tamer Patriarch, who had been beaten deep into the meteorite. "Great sage Acheron, although you are the great sage of Earth Prison, you have always been detached from the world. Why are you involved in this matter? It won't do you any good." The Sword Demon Patriarch stood on a sword and fixed his eyes on the great sage Acheron. In the past, he would not have cared about Acheron, because although he was also a 9-revolution great sage, he was only on par with him. But now, the bald great sage Acheron's strength was beyond his imagination. In fact, he was even stronger than Di Ting. If he could fool such an opponent, he should do so as soon as possible. "Since I've promised to help, I have to help," said the great sage Acheron. He raised the unfinished fortune flatbread in his hand, and took another bite. Ice Saint immediately saw the familiar flatbread. Wasn't it the warm fortune flatbread that Bufang gave her? "Bufang, my little friend, also gave you a flatbread. Eat it, big sister. Eat it quickly. You'll be invincible once you eat it," Great Sage Acheron said. The corner of Ice Saint's mouth twitched. She looked at Great Sage Acheron's shiny bald head, then at the fortune flatbread in her hand. For a moment she found it hard to accept. "No, I won't eat it," Ice Saint waved her hand. She was glad that she was almost fooled by Bufang. Fortunately, she had come up to take a look. Otherwise, if she ate the flatbread and became bald, who would she talk to? Ice Saint refused. Great Sage Acheron, on the other hand, felt a little regretful. When Ice Saint saw his regretful expression, she felt that the old man was up to no good. He actually wanted her, who was so beautiful, to become bald as well. What a sinister man! Boom! Boom! Fire Demon Patriarch and Beastmaster Patriarch soared into the sky again. The 6 patriarchs surrounded Great Sage Acheron and Ice Saint in midair. Their terrible killing intent almost merged together, causing a storm to sweep across the battlefield of the stars. In the distance, Earth Prison Overlord Inglong and the others had already stopped fighting. They were watching the peerless battle between the 9-revolution Great Saints with horror in their hearts. 6 Great Sage were besieging 2 Great Sage. The scene was simply shocking. A fierce battle broke out in an instant. Fire Demon Patriarch and Beastmaster Patriarch charged crazily toward Great Sage Acheron. Sword Demon Patriarch and Shadow Demon Patriarch joined the battle as well. The 4 Great Sages were fighting the bald Acheron. A rumbling sound exploded in the void. Horned Demon Patriarch and Nether Chef Patriarch were fighting Ice Saint. Terrible forces boiled and swept across the battlefield of the stars, stirring up the void and making it rumble. Terrible auras swept out, shattering meteorites and stirring up turbulence in the starry sky. In front of imprisoned Dragon Pass, When the few great sages entered the battlefield of the stars, many Earth prison experts breathed a sigh of relief. Meanwhile, Bufang had finished cooking the fortune flatbreads. A few baskets of flatbreads were placed on the wall. Steaming hot steam rose into the sky. Flatbreads! Flatbreads! Bufang couldn't help but shout as he looked at the Earth prison army that was constantly being suppressed down below. His voice wasn't loud, but it rang through the whole wall. The hearts of the Earth prison experts flickered. Some experts rushed over and paid for the flatbreads without saying a word. After buying and eating the flatbreads, they still had to join the battle, so they had no time to chat with Bufang. The experts who had bought the flatbreads returned to the battlefield to block the enemies for their comrades. They grabbed the flatbreads and took a bite. A crunching sound rang throughout the battlefield. "Brother, I'll block them for you. Go to Owner Boo and buy a flatbread. After that, we'll travel the world with them." The experts who had bought the flatbreads blocked the attacks for those who had no flatbreads, said with a deep face. Similar scenes kept happening on the battlefield. As the experts who had bought the flatbreads rushed into the battlefield, the situation was reversed again. The Nether Prison Army was forced to retreat. Hell's experts' morale skyrocketed at the sight of this. Luo Ji laughed excitedly. Her pink hair seemed to be trembling. Dong, dong, dong. She waved her long sleeves and beat the drums, producing a deafening sound that seemed to boil the blood in people's bodies. Yuji's face lit up as she watched the scene excitedly. She pulled out the hefty sword from her back, took out the fortune flatbreads, and took a bite. As soon as the crispy flatbreads were bitten, the fortune energy inside immediately poured into them. Yuji's eyes lit up. The next moment, she grabbed the overbearing hefty sword and threw it into the distance. The Overlord hefty sword was like a meteorite that rapidly smashed into the battlefield, cleaving an expert in half. Boom! Yuji stood on the wall, her eyes bright. She waved one of her hands. The overbearing hefty sword kept shuttling through the battlefield. A mouthful of fortune energy had given her a top-grade fortune, the sword controlling technique. More importantly, it was not an ordinary sword. She could even control the overbearing hefty sword, which weighed more than 10,000 kilograms. It was a frightening scene. The overbearing hefty sword shuttled through the crowd like a savage beast, constantly spewing out clouds of blood mist. It changed the situation of the battlefield. The Nether Prison Army howled and retreated. Every single one of them was incomparably dumbfounded. They had never thought that they would actually be defeated. They were not defeated by the Earth Prison Army, but by a piece of flatbreads. Damn it! In the Nether Prison battleships in the sky, an expert let out a roar. Rumble! On the warship there was a mysterious energy gathering there. Then, a beam of energy shot toward the wall of imprisoned Dragon Pass. It was going to kill all the experts on the wall. It was the energy beam of the warship, and its power was comparable to the Great Sage's attack. Hades' Era was very curious about Bufang's flatbreads at the moment. Without a doubt, it must have been made by that young Bufang when they entered the Black Temple. He couldn't believe that he had missed such an interesting thing. He felt very sorry. Fortunately, he could still buy it now. He took the fortune flatbreads that Bufang threw over. Holding the steaming flatbreads in his hand, he felt as if they were warm. It was very magical. He bit into it and it was crunchy. As soon as he bit into the crispy skin, Hades' Era's eyes lit up. The tender meat was even more delicious. However, the wisp of fortune energy that went into his mouth made Hades' Era's eyes go wide. The fortune of the fortune flatbreads? Hades' Era sucked in a cold breath. The next moment, he blinked and found that nothing had changed in his body. Where's the fortune I promised? Hades' Era was dumbfounded. Could it be that I's luck is so good that even the fortune energy can't change it? Hades' Era stroked his chin and pondered for a while. On the wall, the few heads of the aristocratic families closest to Hades' Era felt their legs go weak, and they looked at Hades' Era, trembling. Their eyes were full of fear, and after that, they became completely fanatical. They raised their hands, trembling so much that they couldn't even speak. Ming! Ming Ming! Your Excellency Hades! The few aristocratic families knelt on the ground, their heads touching the ground, trembling. Hey, I'm here. You don't have to bow to me. Hades' era was a little confused. Then, his eyes lit up. Could it be that the fortune he had obtained was the legendary overbearing aura that could make all the heavens submit to him? Indeed, this kind of fortune was in line with his identity as Hades. Bufang gave Hades' era a strange look. You had already raised her hand to cover her mouth, her eyes filled with disbelief. It was the first time she had been so shocked. Yuji shivered, and her sword-controlling technique became stiff. She looked behind Hades' era in fear. There, a burly figure emerged. That burly figure was a little vague, but just by standing there, it made people's hearts tremble. It was not because of anything else. It was because of that figure's identity, Hades Tenzang. Hades' era finally came to his senses. These fellows were not afraid of him. He slowly turned his head and looked behind him. His neck stiffened. His fortune wasn't heaven-defying. It was terrifying. His fortune could even summon his dead father? Hades Tenzang opened his eyes. Stars seemed to vanish in his eyes. His terrifying aura gradually filled the air, causing the world around him to shake and collapse. His indifferent eyes fell on Hades' era. That glance scared Hades' era so much that his legs went soft, and he almost fell on his butt. Dad! Dad, long time no see. What a coincidence. You also come out for some fresh air? Chapter 1336. Hades Tenzang, a mighty lord of Earth Prison, was so strong that even the great sage of the 9 Nether Prison clans feared him. He had even led an army of Earth Prison to attack Nether Prison, causing the experts there to panic. However, in the war, this supreme being was beaten by the great sage of the 9 Nether Prison clans, and he was assassinated by the Lord of the Black Temple, a forbidden land in Earth Prison. Under all kinds of methods, this powerhouse finally fell. However, no one had thought that this supreme expert, who had fallen for a long time, had already become a legendary figure. He had reappeared. His eyes, which seemed to be able to vanish the void and make time float, burst into a divine light that made everyone's breathing quicken. Hades Tenzang had reappeared. At this moment, Nether King Ha finally knew why the experts of those aristocratic families knelt in fear. It turned out that his father had reappeared. Is this the so-called fortune? I can't believe I actually summoned my dead father. Buzz, the light around Hades Tenzang flickered. His body was somewhat illusory, and it was obviously not a real body. Although the fortune was strong, it was still very difficult to resurrect a dead man. Death and resurrection were things that involved the supreme laws of the universe. Although the fortune flatbread was awesome, it was still far from the level that involved the laws. Hades Tenzang's aura fluctuated. Perhaps the fortune of the fortune flatbread had only summoned Hades Tenzang to this world for a short time. In fact, because the fortune was so terrifying, Hades Tenzang had only been alive for less than an hour. So, this is Hades Tenzang. Bufang looked at the expert with a magnificent figure, who seemed to be a supreme being with a peerless bearing, and a little surprise came into his eyes. His aura was indeed majestic, and his eyes seemed to contain heaven and earth. He did indeed have the posture and aura of a supreme expert. Hades' era's luck was actually able to summon such an existence. His luck was truly heaven-defying. Perhaps he was the real heaven's chosen one. In response to Hades' era's mischievous words, Hades Tenzang's gaze swept over him faintly. His mind shook, and he understood what had happened. Interesting. It can actually summon me back from the primal chaos. Hades Tenzang's gaze darkened. He raised his hand and patted Hades' era's head. I left the Ghost King pass to you, yet you are still only a second transition great sage. It seems that after I left, you did not cultivate properly. Hades Tenzang glanced at Hades Era and said faintly. Hades Era smiled awkwardly. Although the pressure from Tian Song made him feel a little pressured, this familiar pressure made him sigh with emotion. That's because I'm immersed in the grief of your passing. Grief needs time to dissolve. Hades Era grinned. In response, the corners of Hades Tenzang's mouth rose, revealing a faint smile. Naughty. After so many years, your character hasn't changed. Hades Tenzang smiled, shaking his head. His body was surrounded by rolling black energy. His eyes swept over. His gaze swept over Bufang, pausing on Bufang for a few seconds. Then, it fell on you. Little girl, come here. Let me have a good look at you. When Hades Tenzang saw you, his eyes were a little complicated. After all, he was the one who had exiled you. He felt a little guilty for what he had done to her. You pursed her lips, and the look in her eyes was very complicated. She trotted over to Hades Tenzang. Tian Song raised his hand, rubbed Yu's head, and sighed softly. When he sensed Yu's cultivation base and the curse power in Yu, his eyes narrowed. Good. I didn't expect that the curse power could be turned into power by you. At that time, I tried everything I could, but I couldn't suppress the curse. I didn't expect that you could do this, little girl. Hades Tenzang sighed with emotion. The curse power was turning into Yu's power, and it was growing stronger and stronger. Welcome back, Your Excellency Hades. The aristocratic families kneeling on the ground shouted excitedly. They never thought that the peerless man would come back to life. The supreme existence who had led them to attack Nether Prison had returned when Earth Prison was besieged by Nether Prison. Hades Tenzang's eyes fell on them. Then, his eyes turned and swept over the vast battlefield outside imprisoned Dragon Pass. He could feel the killing atmosphere blowing in his face. Hades Tenzang exhaled softly. Nether Prison has come to attack us. Hades Tenzang seemed to have expected all this. It is imperative to form a great world. There are many small worlds in the Netherworld, but there isn't a great world of its own. Once those powerful great worlds in the starry sky find out about it, I'm afraid the entire Netherworld will become their vassal and be shrouded in deep water and fire. Hades Tenzang said. He seemed to be murmuring to himself. The people around him were a little frightened when they heard that. Anyway, why should I care so much? I'm a dead man after all. Although I've come back, I won't exist for long. Hades Tenzang had a deep look in his eyes. He looked at the Nether Prison battleships in the sky, which kept shooting terrible destructive rays. Slowly, he took a step forward. Heaven and earth seemed to distort at this moment. Like a dazzling star, he stepped straight up in the sky, facing the rays. Boom, 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 boom. Several attacking rays that were comparable to the 7th or 8th Revolution Great Sage suddenly smashed down. The sky seemed to be burned by the rays, twisting and cracking. These rays went straight to imprisoned Dragon Pass, wanting to destroy the entire pass. The terrible power shook heaven and earth. In the face of such power, many people in the imprisoned Dragon Pass trembled. But at this moment they were fearless. Because Hades Tenzang was here. He was the god in the hearts of all the people in Earth Prison. Hades Era raised his head, his eyes shining. He didn't expect to see his father's awe-inspiring appearance again in this life. Compared to his father, he, the so-called Netherworld King, was really at the level of playing house. Yuji, and the heads of the aristocratic families all looked at the sky excitedly, only waiting for Hades Tenzang to show his peerless power again. Bufang clasped his hands, watching Hades Tenzang step by step, as if he was climbing an invisible ladder to the sky. The corners of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. The number one person in Earth Prison indeed deserved it. Boom! The rays smashed on Hades Tenzang's body. Suddenly, it exploded in the sky. Terrible flames swept across heaven and earth, covering the whole place, covering everyone's sight, making everyone suck in a breath of cold air. Such an explosion almost destroyed heaven and earth. In the Nether Prison battleship, the experts widened their eyes in disbelief. All of a sudden, the void twisted. Buzz, smoke, and dust drifted. A figure emerged in the void again. That earth-shattering, terrifying ray didn't blow that expert to death. Hades Tenzang was burly, his face calm. Looking at the battleship in the sky, the corners of his mouth twitched. A bunch of clowns. A moment later, Hades Tenzang raised his hand. Slowly, he squeezed it. Between heaven and earth, countless energies gathered together. Crunch! Crunch! A huge palm appeared in the sky, covering the sun. That palm wrapped the Nether Prison battleship. As he clenched his palms together, the warship gradually crumbled and exploded in the sky, turning into flames that filled the sky. Long before the explosion, the Nether Prison experts rushed out of the battleship. Several second and third revolution Nether Prison Great Sage were enraged to the extreme. Presumptuous! With a loud roar, the Nether Prison Great Sage walked over in the sky. His killing intent swept across heaven and earth, blasting toward the figure in the sky. Crossing the sky, he appeared in front of Hades Tenzang in a short while. However, Hades Tenzang just clasped his hands, raised his eyes, and glanced. That glance, it made the Nether Prison Great Sage tremble with fear. How is this possible? It's him. It's that terrible man. Hades Tenzang? Isn't he dead? The Nether Prison Great Sage was terrified. Looking at that man, they remembered a time when they were dominated by fear. He was a man like a demon king. Even Nether Puppeteer Patriarch doesn't dare to be presumptuous in front of me. How dare a few second and third revolution Nether Puppeteer Patriarch shout at me? Tian-san clasped his hands behind his back and looked at the few great saints. The next moment, with a thought, the black energy around his body condensed into spears. With a surge of his will, those spears immediately turned into streaks of light that soared into the sky and shot out. Run! Without hesitation, the Nether Prison Great Sage turned and tried to flee. In the face of Hades Tenzang, they had no courage to fight. Slash! One black spear after another pierced the Great Sage. The miserable howls of the Great Sage echoed between heaven and earth. The next moment, their bodies exploded with a bang. The Great Sage fell, turning into energy essence and streams of light that sprinkled between heaven and earth like a rain of essence. His back, which looked like a demon king, made him look like a heaven god. In the imprisoned dragon pass, everyone was stunned. Hades' era's blood was boiling. He clenched his fists, and his face was flushed with excitement. The prison overlords and the heads of the aristocratic families were also very excited. This was the former god of Earth Prison. Sure enough, he could shake heaven and earth. He looked down on the heavens. On the battlefield, at this moment, the Nether Prison army, which had been suppressed and forced to retreat, completely lost the will to fight. In an instant, they collapsed and fled out of the imprisoned dragon pass. The army was completely routed. Hades Tenzang glanced around and gave an evil smile. Then, he raised his head, his hair whipping the void as he looked up at the sky. That was the battlefield of the stars. Then, he slowly stepped onto it. He didn't have much time, and he had to solve the problems that needed to be solved in the imprisoned dragon pass. Bufang looked at the cheering Earth Prison army on the battlefield. He couldn't help but touch his nose. He seemed to have won the battle a little too easily. Looking at the remaining steaming fortune flatbreads in the basket, he had no choice but to put it away. It seemed that he couldn't sell them now. But he could sell them slowly in the future. My father is going to the battlefield of the stars. Does anyone want to go and have a look? Hades' era was very excited. He shouted to the people around him. Bufang's heart skipped a beat. The battlefield of the stars? It was a place he had never been to. He heard that the Great Sage's experts fought there because the aftermath of the Great Sage's battle was too strong. He could go and have a look. He didn't know when you had come to his side and tugged at his sleeve. There was a look of eagerness in her eyes. Okay, I got it. Let's go together, Bufang said. Then you narrowed her eyes. At the little saint level, one could step into the starry sky for a short time. Most of the people present were 9 revolution little saints, so it was not difficult for them to enter the starry sky. Rumble. The netherworld ship bobbed up and down. Bufang sat cross-legged on the deck. Ug and Hades Era, who had shamelessly climbed onto the ship, were all there. The next moment the netherworld ship soared into the sky. The experts of the aristocratic families naturally wouldn't miss the chance to admire Hades Tenzang's power. They all burst out their strength and rushed into the starry sky. Even so, it consumed a lot of their energy. In the starry sky, the sky was suddenly torn apart. Terrible air waves rumbled. After all, Ice Saint had just come out of the Forbidden Land, so her strength was greatly weakened. For a moment she was at a disadvantage. But even so, she was still a peerless beauty. As she raised her hands and stomped her feet, ice crystals spread. Great Sage Acheron was very strong. He was bald, but he had also become stronger. He was fighting 5 enemies alone, and he was not at a disadvantage at all. The 5 nether prison patriarchs were dumbfounded. Great Sage Acheron had become so strong after he was bald? They all hesitated, wondering if they should go back and shave their heads. In the past, Great Sage Acheron could only stop 2 Great Sage Patriarchs. Suddenly, Sword Demon Patriarch seemed to have sensed something. He jerked his head and looked down at the churning sea of clouds. His pupils constricted. In the sea of clouds, there was a figure slowly stepping on the air as he walked over. Boom! Great Sage Acheron knocked the 3 away with a punch. Rubbing his bald head, he felt as though steam was rising from his body. However, he seemed to have noticed something. He turned his head and saw a familiar figure. When he saw the figure, Great Sage Acheron's mouth went wide. He was even more surprised than when he was bald. In the distance, Ice Saint, who had knocked Horned Demon Patriarch away with an ice crystal sword, flicked her long eyelashes and jerked her head over her shoulder. Sword Demon Patriarch and the other patriarchs sucked in their breaths in disbelief. How could he still be alive? Hades Tenzang walked leisurely with his hands clasped behind his back. However, he was very fast. With every step he took, he traveled thousands of miles in a flash as if the ground had shrunk to an inch. Before long, he came to the battlefield where the few Great Sage Patriarchs were fighting. He was tall and sturdy, surrounded by a majestic black aura. He glanced at Sword Demon Patriarch and the others. Then, he gave Ice Saint a complicated look. Finally, he rested his eyes on Great Sage Acheron and said in a strange voice, "Well, I haven't seen you for many years." "Ugh, it's been so many years. Yomi, when did you become bald?" "But you've become stronger even though you've become bald." Chapter 1337. Hades Tenzang? Everyone in the battlefield of the stars was dumbfounded. Looking at the man who was already dead, their faces were filled with shock and astonishment. Could the dead come back to life? Sword Demon Patriarch and the others were terrified. They couldn't believe that Hades Tenzang was here. They had seen with their own eyes how Hades Tenzang was killed. His body was torn into thousands of pieces and vanished into the void. However, the man in front of them had appeared again. "No, you didn't come back to life. You're just here with the help of some power." Sword Demon Patriarch was a clever man. When he saw Hades Tenzang's somewhat blurry body, he immediately figured it out. Such a heaven-defying act is against the heavenly path. Sword Demon Patriarch shouted coldly. They were truly frightened by Hades Tenzang. "Ha ha ha! The heavenly path? You're talking to me about the heavenly path? The heavenly path is nothing." Hades Tenzang laughed. Then, he stepped across the air and landed next to Ice Saint. Horned demon patriarch's pupils constricted. How dare you bully my woman? Do you have a death wish? Hades Tenzang grinned coldly. The next moment, he raised his palm, and a terrible power overturned heaven and earth. The palm strike sent Horned Demon Patriarch flying backward, and he smashed heavily into a flying meteorite. Great Sage Acheron touched his bald head, a strange look in his eyes. Hades Tenzang is as strong as ever. Buzz in the distance, a small boat swayed as it sped over. It hovered in the distance of the battlefield of the stars. It watched from afar. Bufang and the others sat on the deck, watching the battle with wide eyes. Great Sage Acheron seemed to sense something. He turned his head and looked in the direction of Bufang and saw Bufang sitting on the deck. Huh? How did Great Sage Acheron become bald? Bufang said with slight surprise. Yeah, Great Sage Acheron wasn't bald before. To be honest, a bald head is really ugly. Hades Era grinned. He seemed to be able to hear the conversation between Bufang and the others. The corner of the Great Sage Acheron's mouth twitched. His heart was filled with grief. Who could he blame for going bald? It was all because of the fortune flatbread, which had turned him bald, and he couldn't do anything to stop it. Fortunately, he was somewhat comforted by the fact that he had become stronger. Otherwise, if he ate a piece of cake and became bald, how aggrieved would that be? Ice Saint was still looking at Hades Tenzang with a complicated gaze. He could not help but sigh as he looked at the latter's somewhat illusory figure. He won't be able to exist in this world for long. It's impossible for a dead person to be resurrected. Let's attack together and obliterate him. Sword Demon Patriarch's pupils constricted as he said. An explosion rang out. In the meteorite, Horned Demon Patriarch's body suddenly grew larger, turning into a huge three-horned rhinoceros that blotted out the sky. His horn was shrouded in a cold light, and his huge body was like a towering mountain. Rumble! The rhinoceros charged forward with his horn, heading toward Hades Tenzang. The void seemed to be on the verge of shattering. Beast! Hades Tenzang's eyes suddenly turned sharp. A pitch-black energy swept out and covered his body, turning into the Hades armor. He raised his hand, and the Hades halberd appeared in his hand. Hades swung the halberd, smashing it hard on the head of the charging rhinoceros. It was as if a mountain had crumbled. The terrible explosion pushed the huge rhinoceros back a few steps. The rumbling sound shook the sky. The rhinoceros was furious. It continued to charge forward. Attack together. He is no longer as brave as he used to be. Sword Demon Patriarch's eyes lit up when he saw that Hades Tenzang had failed to seriously injure Horned Demon Patriarch. He bellowed. The next moment, all the Great Sage Patriarchs attacked at the same time. Boom, boom, boom. Accompanied by a depressing roar, it charged towards them. Hey, do you think I don't exist? However, as soon as they moved, they were intercepted by a figure. It was none other than Great Sage Acheron. Great Sage Acheron had his back to Sword Demon Patriarch and the others. His head was turned 45 degrees to the side, and he looked very gloomy. His indifferent voice caused the expressions of the Sword Demon Patriarchs to flicker. Acheron, if you insist on getting involved in this, you will die a horrible death. Don't blame me for not warning you. A man like you who has lived for so long must be afraid of death. Since you are afraid of death, get out of here as far as you can. Sword Demon Patriarch said coldly. Buzz around his body, flying swords rose into the air, and within the sword light, there was an explosion of infinite power. Yes, a man who has lived for so long will be afraid of death. Great Sage Acheron said, stroking his bald head. But I hate it more when people threaten me than when I'm afraid of death. Great Sage Acheron grinned. The next moment, a jade jar suddenly appeared in his hand. Zhang Xian grabbed the green jade jar and opened its lid. A rich aroma of wine wafted out of it, and a colorful light filled the sky. Gulp! He carefully took a sip of the wine. Great Sage Acheron narrowed his eyes and smacked his lip. He looked like he was enjoying the wine very much. Just in case, I'd better take a sip of the wine first. Great Sage Acheron said. How dare you force me to drink my precious wine? None of you can escape. Great Sage Acheron carefully put away the jade jar. Then, he clenched his fist. His bald head shone brightly in the starry sky as he charged toward the 5 patriarchs. They began to fight again. Rumbling sounds echoed through the heavens. In the distance, Hades, Hera, and the others were dumbfounded. Good heavens! When did Great Sage Acheron become so powerful? He's bald, but he's become stronger? Is there such a strange thing? Bufang had a strange look in his eyes as well. Is this the legendary Teacher Acheron? The fortune obtained by Great Sage Acheron is really different from the rest. Hades Tenzang held the Hades halberd. Although it was not the real Hades halberd, its power was still boundless. Every time it struck, the huge 3-horned rhinoceros would bleed profusely. Ice Saint hovered in the distance, her white dress fluttering in the wind. Looking at that majestic figure, she couldn't help but recall many things. That figure, who had slaughtered so many people, had the spirit to fight against 10,000 people alone. What a pity, he had fallen in the end. However, now that she could see him again, she felt a little melancholy. Boom! The huge 3-horned rhinoceros was struck down. The 3 horns on his head were ripped off, and blood gushed out like a fountain. Hades Tenzang didn't say anything to Ice Saint. He didn't even make eye contact. He just kept beating the 3-horned rhinoceros. It was as if he was venting all his emotions on it. His silence made Ice Saint's heart even more gloomy. She knew Hades Tenzang also knew, after all, he wouldn't exist in this world for long. Perhaps he could do something for her. To kill the 3-horned rhinoceros that had just bullied her. Boom! Hades Tenzang's eyes were sharp. With a hard slap, he broke the last horn of the 3-horned rhinoceros. The 3-horned rhinoceros let out a miserable howl. The great sage's blood spilled across the starry sky. The 3-horned rhinoceros horn was broken and hovering in the battlefield of the stars. Horned Demon Patriarch was scared. He was really scared. He thought that Hades Tenzang would no longer be as brave as he was in the past. However, he never thought that Hades Tenzang would be even crazier and more abnormal than he was in the past. He didn't treat the 3-horned rhinoceros at all. He took a step. Hades Tenzang's black hair tore through the sky like thunderbolt. His eyes were sharp, and he rode on the 3-horned rhinoceros's back. Then, he raised his huge fists and smashed them down again and again. Boom! 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 Every punch made the 3-horned rhinoceros cough up blood. The sword demon patriarchs were stunned. If this goes on, the 3-horned rhinoceros will be killed. The fall of the patriarchs of the 9 Nether Prison clans was definitely an earth-shattering event for Nether Prison. They couldn't afford to take this responsibility. Go and save it. Sword Demon Patriarch roared. Thousands of swords swept out of him. 10,000 swords returned to origin. Boom! Boom! The swords broke free from the great sage Acheron. They turned into a river of swords and rushed toward Hades Tenzang. The river of swords carried terrible power and seemed to be able to cut through everything. This was Sword Demon Patriarch's strongest trick. In the past, he had used the same move when he faced Tiansong. Buzz, Hades held the halberd in his hand. Hades Tenzang's eyes were sharp. Then, he swung Hades's halberd and drew a circle over his head. Boom! 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 The river of swords poured down and smashed into the circle, but they didn't go any further. All the swords were knocked away. Then, the huge fist smashed down again and hit the 3-horned rhinoceros. Ice Saint stared blankly at the scene. Her nose finally turned red, and she covered her mouth with her slender hand. On the Netherworld ship, Yu's eyes flickered. Yuji pursed her lips. Bufang's face was expressionless. Hades' brows kept twitching. My dad's flirting skills are as awesome as ever. Suddenly Bufang's mind flickered and he narrowed his eyes. Rumble. A terrifying pressure suddenly descended upon the world. This pressure was incomparably terrifying. As soon as it appeared, it was as if the whole world was about to be destroyed. Everyone jerked their heads in a direction. There. The sky and earth of the battlefield of the stars were torn apart. A silhouette slowly walked out from within. Everyone sucked in a cold breath. The sky and earth of the battlefield of the stars were very stable. To tear it apart, the force needed was too great. However, the newcomer could tear the void and come out. How strong was he? It was an expert with golden light all over his body. He was tall and burly, and his face was serious. His eyes were cold and emotionless, as if he could destroy everything. Terrible fluctuations shook the void. Tyrant Patriarch? As the man walked through the starry sky, the world around him seemed to distort. The turbulence in the void whipped him, but he remained unmoved. He was able to resist the whipping of the turbulence with just his fleshly body. He was incomparably strong. A terrible pressure swept across the whole place, making it hard for everyone to breathe. Tyrant Patriarch was one of the top 3 patriarchs of the 9 nether prison clans. His strength was much stronger than that of Sword Demon Patriarch. He did not come to Nether Prison's attack on Earth Prison this time, but no one expected that he would tear the void and appear at this critical moment. His eyes were like sharp streams of light, shooting over and cracking the void. Many people felt their eyes sting when they met his gaze. Bufang even narrowed his eyes slightly. Hades Tenzang. You're like a ghost. If you're dead, just be a ghost. Why come back to the world? Put down the horned beast. Tyrant Patriarch stepped through the void, his overbearing voice ringing through the heavens. Riding on the rhino's head, Hades Tenzang gave Tyrant Patriarch an indifferent look. Hades thrust the halberd in his hand into the rhino's head. Who do you think you are to put it down just because you said so? Hades thrust the halberd in. The rhino's eyes turned blood red in an instant, and its miserable howl echoed through the world. Its body trembled violently, and its aura seemed to be on the verge of collapse. How dare you! With a loud roar, the void exploded. Tyrant Patriarch took a step forward and raised his fist. There seemed to be golden energy swirling around the fist, and its power seemed to be able to shatter heaven and earth. Since that's the case, then you can die again. Then, he threw a punch. It turned into a huge fist that shook the heavens. Suddenly, a bald figure descended from the sky. Then, he raised his fist and threw a punch at Tyrant Patriarch without flinching. A loud rumble rang out. The golden fist abruptly shattered. Great Sage Acheron trembled. Tian Song boy, do what you want to do. Let me block this baldy. Consider it my tribute to you. Great Sage Acheron said. Yes, Tyrant Patriarch was also bald. Hades Tenzang's eyes flickered. The next moment, he smiled evilly. Hades swung his halberd again. With a slash, he stabbed the rhino. The rhino trembled violently and began to grow weaker. Its vitality scattered between heaven and earth. Bufang's eyes lit up. Staring at the huge rhino, his breathing became rapid. That was a 9-revolution Great Sage ingredient. He couldn't let it go to waste. A ripping sound rang out. Hades's halberd slashed across the rhino's back. It tore a huge wound on the rhino's back. Blood flowed. A rain of blood fell. In the distance, Great Sage Acheron rushed toward Tyrant Patriarch. He threw a punch. It collided with Tyrant Patriarch's fist again. A loud rumble rang out. Great Sage Acheron's eyes went wide as he was knocked flying away. The powerful aura on his body also began to rapidly decline, and on his bald head, there were also stubble growing out. Oh no! It's time for the good fortune. Great Sage Acheron's heart sank. He touched his head and was delighted to find that hair had grown out. In the distance, Hades Tenzang's body began to become more and more vague, and black smoke kept escaping. The rhino's body floated in midair, its belly turned upside down. There was no life force left. A patriarch of one of the 9 nether prison clans had fallen. However, Hades Tenzang didn't take it seriously at all. His eyes finally fell on Ice Saint. They didn't speak, but their eyes met. He let out a long sigh. A gust of wind blew. Hades Tenzang's body turned into smoke and disappeared from the battlefield of the stars. Ice Saint put down her hand and pursed her red lip. There was a touch of sorrow on her beautiful face. On the netherworld ship, Hades Era's eyes went blank. When he saw Hades Tenzang disappear, he felt a little suffocated. Bufang, give me a flatbread. I want a flatbread. Hades Era turned to look at Bufang and said seriously. It's useless. Bufang glanced at Hades Era. But he still handed the flatbread to him and watched as Hades Era stuffed it into his mouth. Chapter 1338. After all, Hades Tenzang was already dead. Although the fortune flatbread could bring him back to life for a short time, it couldn't make him live forever. Hades Tenzang himself knew this, so he killed Horned Demon Patriarch in a short time. The great sage's blood dyed the starry sky and the battlefield. A huge corpse of the great sage lay in the starry sky. The rhino's true form was a savage beast, and it was a very powerful one. Its huge body hovered like a mountain, and blood kept flowing out of its huge gash. He was a nether prison patriarch with terrifying strength, but now, he had died tragically in the battlefield of the stars. An oppressive aura filled the air. Sword Demon Patriarch and the others fell silent, and their eyes flashed with cold light. Tyrant Patriarch's eyes were as sharp as lightning, bursting with boundless light. Looking at the rhino's corpse, his anger kept rising, and the golden light on his body grew brighter and brighter. There was a hint of sorrow in Ice Saint's eyes. As she watched Hades Tenzang's body turn into smoke and dissipate, she felt a stabbing pain in her heart. Bufang fell silent. Then, he handed the fortune flatbread to Hades Era. Era grabbed it and stuffed it into his mouth. Perhaps he wanted to be lucky, or perhaps he wanted to fill his heart with hope. However, Bufang knew that it was impossible for the same kind of fortune to appear in a short time, and the probability was very small. Especially when an existence like Hades Tenzang was summoned. The luck needed to obtain such a fortune was simply heaven-defying. Hades Era should have just been lucky enough to summon Hades Tenzang. However, if he wanted to do it again, the difficulty was close to impossible. With the dry flatbread stuffed in his mouth, Hades Era's aura soared, but his movements gradually slowed down. Sure enough, he couldn't summon it again. Even though the fortune gas had entered his body and improved his cultivation base by several revolutions, it didn't bring him any joy. He would rather not improve his cultivation. Yuchi and Yuchi's eyes were also filled with sorrow. They were also very respectful towards Hades Tenzang. After all, it was Hades Tenzang who gave them life and brought them back from nether prison to earth prison. Hades Tenzang was like their father. Bufang watched as Hades Era choked on his biscuit. His eyes widened as he coughed continuously. He couldn't help but sigh. He raised his hand and gently patted Hades Era's back. It helped him catch his breath. "Come on, people have to look forward," Bufang said seriously. Hades Era let out a sigh of relief. At this moment, he had also calmed down. "Forget it. If I can't recruit them, then so be it. After all, this father of mine is only here to pick up girls." Hades Era twitched his mouth and said something he didn't mean. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. He thought what Hades Era said made sense. Looking at Ice Saint in the distance, whose eyes were red as if she was touched, he couldn't help but marvel at Hades Tenzang's powerful skills in picking up girls. Buzz, a terrible aura burst out of the void. Tyrant Patriarch's eyes swept across the battlefield like a dragon. Sword Demon Patriarch and the others floated up and landed behind Tyrant Patriarch. Their terrible auras towered into the sky as if to distort everything. Oh no! Hades' face turned very unsightly. His heart trembled as he sensed Tyrant Patriarch's domineering aura. It was time for the great sage Acheron's fortune. Tian-Tsang, on the other hand, had disappeared as well. If that happened, Earth Prison would be at a complete disadvantage in the battlefield of the stars. In the face of Nether Prison, who had Tyrant Patriarch, they were now like fish on the chopping block. Great Sage Acheron floated around Bufang and the others. On his head there were already black hair stubble growing out. He was no longer bald, so he was no longer as strong as before. Great Sage Acheron was actually looking forward to his formidable strength. However, he also knew his own limit. In a short period of time, it was impossible for him to become bald again, and it was impossible for him to become so strong. He had regrets, but more importantly, he was thinking about how to face Tyrant Patriarch's wrath. Tyrant Patriarch ranks third among the 9 Patriarch-level experts of the 9 Nether Prison clans. His strength is second only to Nether Puppeteer Patriarch and D-Ting Patriarch. Great Sage Acheron said. Although he's only ranked third, it's enough to crush us. Judging from the punch he exchanged with Tyrant Patriarch just now, Tyrant Patriarch's strength was really terrifying. Although they had won the war on the ground, that was. However, the premise was that their Great Sage could hold off the other side's Great Sage. Once Nether Prison's Great Sage won, the war on the ground would be meaningless. If that happened, the victory on the ground would be meaningless. In front of a 9-revolution Great Sage, influencing a war was as simple as eating and drinking. Ice Saint, Great Sage Acheron, Hades' and the others had gathered around the Netherworld ship. They looked warily at the experts in the distance, led by Tyrant Patriarch. Tyrant Patriarch was a sage who could resist the erosion of the energy in the starry sky with his fleshly body alone. Therefore, his strength was beyond ordinary people's imagination. His eyes swept across the crowd like torches. At last, he fixed them on Bufang. Sword Demon Patriarch whispered something in Tyrant Patriarch's ear. Tyrant Patriarch's eyes grew sharper as he looked at Bufang. It was as if it was looking at its prey. That young man is the inheritor of the person you mentioned. Tyrant Patriarch's cold voice resounded in the battlefield of the stars like the sound of metal scraping against metal. Sword Demon Patriarch nodded solemnly. Back in hell, he hadn't been able to kill that brat and had even sent Black Demon to assassinate him. Instead, Black Demon had been killed instead. The situation puzzled Sword Demon Patriarch a little. But it didn't matter. Today, all troubles had to be resolved. Killing him will solve the problem once and for all, and there will be no more threats. If that man's legacy doesn't appear again, no one can stop the rise of Nether Prison, said Sword Demon Patriarch. Tyrant Patriarch nodded, seemingly agreeing to Sword Demon Patriarch's request. The next moment, he took a step forward. Boom! The muscles on his body trembled, causing the void to crack. In a flash, he appeared in front of Bufang and the others. That person's successor, Patriarch Tyrant said lightly. The next moment, he reached out a hand toward Bufang's head. The hand seemed to be made entirely of gold, and streams of golden light flowed across it. Bufang slightly furrowed his brows. He felt a pressure that made his muscles tremble slightly. Come here. Tyrant Patriarch bellowed coldly. Boom. Great Sage Acheron's water poured out of him, turned into a blood-colored water dragon, and rushed out. He pointed a finger straight at Tyrant Patriarch. The water dragon roared and slammed into Tyrant Patriarch's hand, producing a deafening rumble. The blood-colored water dragon coiled around Tyrant Patriarch, trying to restrain him. Acheron, where's your previous strength? You're so weak now. Tyrant Patriarch's eyes flashed brightly. At the moment, Great Sage Acheron was only equivalent to Sword Demon Patriarch. He didn't take him seriously at all. Rumble! Tyrant Patriarch clenched his fists, and his aura soared, causing the water dragons to explode in an instant. Water splashed in all directions. Columns of blood-colored water turned into arrows and shot toward Bufang and the others. Great Sage Acheron staggered a few steps, and his face grew unsightly. Ice Saint's eyes had turned ice blue. A snowstorm swept up in an instant, freezing the water columns in midair. Tyrant Patriarch watched the scene. He narrowed his eyes slightly. Buzz, suddenly, a beam of golden light flashed across the battlefield of the stars. Tyrant Patriarch suddenly appeared in front of Ice Saint. "I told you! You can't stop me!" A huge golden fist enlarged in front of everyone's eyes. Then, the fist smashed down. The ice shattered in an instant, and a cracking sound rang out as numerous cracks spread across its surface. Rumble, the ice crumbled. Ice Saint snorted softly and staggered backward in the air. With every step he took, ice crystals would form and shatter. "Damn it! If this goes on, all of us will be killed by this big guy." Hades' Era's pupils constricted. He put away his playfulness and said solemnly, "Tyrant Patriarch's strength was beyond their expectation. Where's that mangy dog? Didn't he go to the Black Temple with you? Why did you come back, but he didn't? With that mangy dog here. Maybe there's still hope." Great Sage Acheron jerked his head to look at Hades' Era. "Where's Lord Go?" Bufang also frowned. A helpless look came over Hades' Era's face. Earth Prison Dog might have found some fortuitous encounter in the Black Temple and fallen into a deep sleep. When he wakes up, that dog will become even more terrifying. But I'm afraid we can't count on him now. Hades' Era sighed softly. "Then let's attack together." Great Sage Acheron took out the jade wine jar and took a swig. The taste of the wine lingered in his mouth, causing his aura to climb and reach its peak. Boom! Acheron's water swept out and turned into a huge blood dragon behind Acheron Great Sage. At Great Sage Acheron's command, the blood dragon flapped its wings and sped away. The sky seemed to be about to be torn apart. Ice Saint's eyes suddenly burst out with a bright blue light. Her slender fingers kept pointing in the air. Then, the whole area seemed to turn into a world of ice and snow. In the blink of an eye, the huge blood dragon turned into a huge blood-colored ice crystal and rushed toward Tyrant Patriarch. This was the joint attack of two great sage patriarchs, and its power was extraordinary. Hades' Era held the Hades halberd and wore the Hades armor. He leaped up and landed on the tail of the ice crystal blood dragon. As he galloped forward, his aura continued to gather. Finally, he rushed to the blood dragon's head. He leaped high into the air. Hades' halberd glowed with a bright light. It swept out in an instant. A half-moon halberd light shot out. The halberd light, the blood dragon, and the ice crystal. It shot toward Tyrant Patriarch. For a moment, its power was unparalleled. Even Sword Demon Patriarch would have to flee in terror from such an attack. However, Tyrant Patriarch was still indifferent. He raised his hand. The blood dragon charged at him. With a rumble, he intercepted it with one hand. As for the half-moon halberd light, Tyrant Patriarch opened his mouth and let out a loud cry. At the same time, his blood and chi surged and surged. A terrible rumble seemed to sweep through heaven and earth. A golden bolt of lightning burst out of his mouth. The lightning smashed down and shattered the half-moon halberd light. As for the ice crystal blood dragon, the ice crystals on it emitted a chill that seemed to spread along Tyrant Patriarch's hand that was holding the blood dragon's head. However, it was indeed washed away by the surging blood and chi. Hot steam rose from it. Tyrant Patriarch's arm suddenly grew thicker. The next moment, he closed his palm and squeezed it. There was a cracking sound. The giant ice crystal blood dragon was forcefully squeezed until it exploded. Boom! The sound of an explosion rang out. Great Sage Acheron, Ice Saint, and Hades' era almost despaired. Tyrant Patriarch was almost invincible. It's useless to put up a desperate struggle. Tyrant Patriarch's eyes seemed to be sneering as he glanced at Great Sage Acheron, Ice Saint, and Hades' era. Finally, he fixed his gaze on Bufang. His eyes suddenly became sharp. "You must die," Tyrant Patriarch said. Then, he raised his hand and pointed a finger at Bufang. The finger turned solid, as if it was going to kill Bufang in an instant. The rumbling might seem to have shattered the void. A single finger shot across the sky. The expressions of Hades' era and the others changed dramatically. Bufang stood in front of the Netherworld ship. He raised his head and looked at the finger that blotted out the sky and completely filled his vision. His expression didn't change. Yu and Yuji's faces had already turned very unsightly, and Yuji was shivering. Facing this move, Bufang didn't dodge. He took a step forward and rushed toward the finger. Tyrant Patriarch wanted to kill him, and so did Sword Demon Patriarch and the others. However, did they really think he was a fish on the chopping block? A cold smile appeared at the corner of Bufang's mouth. Who didn't have a temper? Buzz, his mind flickered. 2 pots immediately appeared in his hands. One was a perishing pot, and the other was a crazy sword pot, surging with power. His mind flickered. The next moment, the fortune flatbreads appeared and fell into the 2 woks. The next moment, Tyrant Patriarch's finger struck him. An explosion shook the sky. Tyrant Patriarch was confident that even the 7 or 8 revolution Great Sage would die, let alone the 9 revolution Little Saint. Even if that boy was that person's inheritor, he had not grown up yet, so he was still an ant. If he was an ant, he had to accept the fact that he would be killed. Buzz, suddenly, Tyrant Patriarch's eyes narrowed. He sensed a strange fluctuation in his divine will. In the explosion, a loud and clear bird cry resounded. The next moment, in the flames that filled the sky, a thin figure floated in midair. He held 2 pots in his hands, a clay pot and a dried pot. He pressed the 2 pots together with all his strength, and a terrifying fluctuation spread out from the 2 pots. However, the energy that leaked out was like the fusion of yin and yang. "Guess how lucky I am?" Bufang raised his head, his hair fluttering in the wind as he twitched the corner of his mouth. The next moment, the 2 pots containing the fortune flatbreads, which had transformed into the yin-yang fish pot, were thrown out by Bufang. They smashed toward Tyrant Patriarch's tyrant body. Chapter 1339. The perishing pot and the crazy sword pot were mixed together. The 2 were mixed together in the form of yin and yang fishes. This method was borrowed from his own yin and yang spirit sea. Therefore, he showed a peaceful attitude. Most importantly, Bufang stuffed a fortune flatbread into each of the 2 pots. Bufang had planned to carve the time gourmet array on the yin-yang fish pot, but after thinking about it, he realized that the new gourmet array hadn't been tested yet, so he didn't know how terrifying it would be. If he didn't control it well, it would explode before he threw it out. Therefore, Bufang didn't choose to carve the time gourmet array on it. Buzz like a beam of flowing light, the 2 woks intertwined with each other and then shot forward with incredible speed. In the blink of an eye, the void collapsed as they sped along. Tyrant Patriarch's eyes flashed like lightning as he stared at the 2 pots flying toward him with a disdainful look on his face. Why should he be afraid of the means of a 9 revolution Little Saint? He was going to smash the 2 pots with one hand. Members of the Tyrant clan had infinite confidence in their fleshly bodies, which were their most powerful means of attack. In the distance, the look on Bufang's face was a little strange when he threw out the 2 pots. The addition of the fortune flatbread was just a flash of inspiration. Even Bufang didn't know how much the power of the 2 pots would increase after they collided. But perhaps it wouldn't be too weak. When he was just a 9 revolution Little Saint, The power produced by the two pots was already very terrifying. Now, his strength had improved rapidly and reached the 9-revolution little saint realm. The power of the perishing pot and the crazy sword pot had also increased a lot. This was also the first time Bufang had tested the power of the two pot. Since Tyrant Patriarch was so strong, he might as well use him as a test subject. In any case, the other party wanted to kill him, so he deserved to be blown up. When Nether King Erha and the others saw what Bufang threw out, they couldn't help but be stunned. Great Sage Acheron narrowed his eyes while Ice Saint frowned. Bufang was actually looking forward to it. With the help of the fortune flatbread, he didn't know how powerful the yin-yang fish pot was. This kind of luck, insignificant skill. Tyrant Patriarch's eyes shone like torches. A rich fragrance lingered in the starry sky. Looking at the two pots, Tyrant Patriarch's eyes grew colder. As expected, you actually used dishes as a means of attack. You're even more direct than that person. He took a deep breath. Tyrant Patriarch thrust out his palm. He slapped the two pots. He wanted to smash the two woks into smithereens. There was a loud bang. He swung his palm at it. Then, after a moment of silence, there was a loud explosion. The terrifying explosion swept across the world in an instant and filled the sky. Flames devoured everything. Rumble! A terrifying explosion swept out in an instant. A terrifying wave of air surged out. The energy in the sword pot of destruction boiled and melted the fortune flatbread in it. The next moment, the fortune gas in the flatbread spread to the whole pot. On the other side, the same thing happened to the crazy sword pot. There seemed to be a bright light blooming in the two pots. Tyrant Patriarch felt something was wrong when he slapped the pot with his palm. He furrowed his brows. Oh! Sword Demon Patriarch and the others, who were the closest to him, exclaimed in surprise. They seemed to find the trick a little strange. The explosion broke out. Tyrant Patriarch's body was devoured in an instant. Thousands of swords shuttled back and forth in the flames, moving extremely fast. As the fortune gas exploded, the power of the explosion rose again. The power of the explosion rose again, and with a deafening rumble, Sword Demon Patriarch and the others retreated several steps in horror. Waves of air filled the air. A deafening explosion resounded through the skies. Everyone was completely shocked. Looking at Tyrant Patriarch, who was devoured by the flames, they couldn't help but swallow. Was this really the work of the chef, who was only a 9-revolution little saint? Its power was comparable to the offensive means of the 9-revolution great sage. The terrible destructive power seemed to be about to collapse the battlefield of the stars. Great Sage Acheron widened his eyes. Then, he grinned. Looking at Tyrant Patriarch, who was devoured by the flames, he felt a sense of satisfaction. This explosion should be enough to make that guy suffer. Great Sage Acheron said excitedly. Tyrant Patriarch was strong, but ordinary people couldn't withstand such an explosion. Even a tyrant body would be injured. My little friend Bufang always comes up with some messy things. I can't believe the power of the pot has increased so much as his strength has improved. In the future, when Bufang's cultivation base reached the level of the great sage, the pot would blow a hole in the starry sky. It was simply too violent. In the sky, surging sword intent swept out as if to tear the sky apart. After a long time, it slowly retracted and gradually disappeared. The void was silent. Everyone was staring at the center of the battlefield. Over there, Tyrant Patriarch bore the brunt of the terrible explosion. Everyone was curious whether Tyrant Patriarch's mighty body could withstand the explosion. Would it be reduced to ashes in the air? Sword Demon Patriarch and the others focused their eyes as if they wanted to see through the void. Suddenly, everyone's pupils constricted. Hades Era, Acheron, Great Sage, and the others also focused their eyes. In the void, the aftermath of the explosion spread, and the smoke and dust dissipated. The flames disappeared, and the sword energy collapsed. A figure stood upright in the battlefield of the stars. Soon, everyone saw the figure clearly. They all sucked in cold breath. Tyrant Patriarch stood proudly in the battlefield of the stars, his hair striking the sky like thunderbolts. His face looked as if it had been carved by a knife. His muscles bulged and his entire body seemed to have grown several times larger out of nowhere. His muscles, which were like those of a horned dragon, seemed to contain the power to destroy heaven and earth. There were sword marks all over his body, which should have been caused by the crazy sword pot's sword energy. One of them was even more hideous. It went from the base of his neck to his waist, looking very ghastly. Drops of blood seeped out of it. However, it was only a little. Gurgle, gurgle. Tyrant Patriarch's eyes were indifferent. The corners of his mouth curved upward slightly. The wounds on his body were wriggling at a speed visible to the naked eye as they began to heal rapidly. In just a few moments, the hideous wound returned to its original state. As his muscles bulged, his blood and energy surged like mighty waves hitting the reef, producing a loud explosion. The rumbling was deafening. I have to say, your technique is indeed amazing. If you were an ordinary 9-revolution great sage, you would have been seriously injured. Unfortunately, you met me. Tyrant Patriarch's eyes turned and fell on Bufang. There was a hint of admiration in his eyes as he looked at Bufang. What he said was right. The Tyrant clan had an invincible fleshly body. Their fleshly body had even reached the level of immortality. If it were Sword Demon Patriarch and the others, they might have been seriously injured by Bufang's move. The enhancement of the Fortune Flatbread had made the power of the technique even more terrifying. The power of the Perishing Pot and the Sword Pot was almost equal to the punch of the Bald Acheron. However, with the enhancement of the Fortune Flatbread, it was a little stronger than the punch of the Bald Acheron. Tyrant Patriarch, on the other hand, was covered with cuts and bruises. However, but to Tyrant Patriarch, this kind of injury was just a minor one. You are indeed that man's inheritor. You're very strong, very talented. Perhaps compared to that man, your potential may be greater, because even that man couldn't hurt a hair of mine when he was as strong as you are now. The corners of Tyrant Patriarch's mouth twitched. His smile was a little gruesome, and it made the hair of those who saw it stand on end. But that's why you have to die. Gurgle, gurgle. All of the sword scars had recovered, and the large wounds had also healed in an instant. Tyrant Patriarch raised his hand and looked at his body, which was as good as new. A faint smile appeared on his face. Now it's my turn. Tyrant Patriarch looked up and fixed his eyes on Bufang. Bufang's pupils constricted, and his whole body tensed up as if he was being stared at by a viper. This feeling, it was extremely uncomfortable. Rumble! A golden figure streaked across the sky. In just a flash, he appeared in front of Bufang. His oppressive aura made everyone tremble. Tyrant Patriarch's body bulged like a little giant, and his fist was even bigger than Xiao Bai's. The next moment, he threw a punch at Bufang's head. If this punch landed, it would probably blow up Bufang's head. Great Sage Acheron suddenly appeared. He threw out his hand, and the water of the Acheron River quickly gathered into a spinning vortex in his palm. He wanted to fend off the punch. Boom! The fist smashed down. Great Sage Acheron's Acheron River vortex exploded. Great Sage Acheron's pupils constricted. His whole body was sent flying like a cannonball, smashing into the meteorite with a loud bang. Blood spurted out of his mouth. Tyrant Patriarch, who had gone all out, had made Great Sage Acheron vomit blood with just one move. Was this the power of the Great Sage at the consummate level? Ice Saint and Hades Era narrowed their eyes. They were about to make a move. However, Tyrant Patriarch jerked his head around and let out a deafening roar like a savage beast. Get lost! Roar! Hades Era and Ice Saint were in a trance. They felt as if a multicolored savage beast was roaring at them. A majestic wave of blood chi surged over, forcing the two of them to take several steps back. His leg whipped out fiercely. Then, she aimed at Bufang's head. Nethery's pitch-black eyes glowed with a green radiance as she stood up straight on the Netherworld ship. Her aura began to fluctuate. However, as soon as she moved, she was stopped by Bufang. Looking at the terrifying and oppressive Tyrant Patriarch, Bufang's eyes narrowed. Tyrant Patriarch is really strong. How terrifying are Nether Puppeteer Patriarch and D Ting Patriarch, who are even stronger. For the first time, Bufang felt that the Nether prison's strength was so strong. Bufang, on the other hand, had a vague feeling that the patriarchs of the 9 Nether prison clans wanted to kill him. Perhaps they have something to do with the previous host, so they're afraid of me growing up, a thought flashed through his mind. Bufang's divine will sank into his spirit sea in an instant. 9 vortexes were spinning at the same time, and a golden book hovered over them with 2 drops of golden liquid on it. They were the god of cooking's divine power liquid drops. Buzz, White Tiger, lying in a corner of the spirit sea, opened his eyes. Even the slumbering black tortoise looked over in confusion. The golden divine dragon was already shouting. Little host, you're wasting God's gift. Are you going to waste divine power liquid drops again? Do you know how precious these divine power liquid drops are? The artifact spirits fixed their eyes on Bufang, who was hovering over the golden book. White Tiger got to his feet. Perhaps he really couldn't stand it any longer. Host, don't waste divine power liquid drop. Let me do it. It's not easy to get divine power liquid drops, so you must cherish them. White Tiger said. Bufang paused for a moment. He didn't expect the artifact spirits to react so violently. The enemy this time is stronger, so isn't it normal to use divine power liquid drops? Didn't those artifact spirits go crazy when he killed Black Demon, the weak 9 Revolution Great Saint of the Black Temple, with a single divine power liquid drop? The enemy this time may be the perfected Great Sage. Bufang's face was very serious. However, the White Tiger raised its head proudly. The perfected Great Sage? In my eyes, he's nothing but trash. Besides, he should be looking forward to meeting me. Buzz, in midair, Tyrant Patriarch threw a punch. The next moment, his fist froze, because he saw the change in Bufang's eyes. They had become extremely sharp. It was like a sharp longsword, or a high and mighty lord of all beasts. His black hair turned white in an instant. White-haired Bufang raised his chin, grabbed a fortune flatbread, stuffed it into his mouth, and took a bite. Tyrant boy, long time no see. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.